Okay, great. All right. Welcome everyone to the June 25th meeting of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District. I'm President Chris Deppie. I'll now call roll. Director Hasai. Just unmute yourself, Sylvia. You can't unmute yourself? Wait a second. I'm trying to make it so you can unmute yourself. Let's try this. Try to unmute yourself. She's going to be back. Okay, let's, Rochelle?
Here.
Cyrus?
Here.
Eileen? Eileen?
Okay, I'm unmuted finally.
Great. And Sylvia? Can you unmute yourself, Sylvia? No? Let me see if I can. I'm asking you to unmute yourself many, many times. Panelists should be able to unmute themselves. Let's see here.
Maybe she didn't join as a panelist.
No, she's definitely a panelist. Sorry, everyone. Got to get this worked out. Can everyone else test that they can unmute themselves? All right, let me just, because you should be able to unmute yourself. So I don't want to.
There I could.
Okay.
Yeah, I can now. You just did something.
Yeah. There.
Cyrus, can you?
Try. I mean, I can unmute myself now. If I mute myself, then I'm muted completely.
Yeah, I changed the setting.
It might be a setting when you're setting up the webinar. I seem to recall there was a setting. So it might have had to been completed before.
Do I have these?
It looks like everybody's unmuted, I think.
I'm here, sorry.
Great, good. Okay. All right, well, I'm not going to mute anybody. Well, I'll explain in a second. All right, so Sylvia's here. So we're all here. I'm here. Before we get started, just a couple of things. Last meeting, someone requested that the attendees get to view it in gallery view, which I've set that up. Let me double check that. So supposedly the attendees can see it in gallery view. I've seen webinars in both cases, and I could see the advantage of having a gallery view, so that's what we've got. Also, as I said, I'd like not to have to unmute people. It's a pain for you, it's a pain for me. So we'll try that. I'm not going to mute anybody. If you mute yourself and you need to be unmuted, I'll do it for you. But the problem with just letting people speak however they want is that Zoom is not very, let's say, democratic as far as who gets to speak. It's just whoever takes over the microphone or the video or audio feed gets it, and it's really hard to know who could break in and who can't. So I still would like people to raise their hands, at least panelists, if you want to speak. It should put you at the top of the list, so I should be able to call on people in order. So I'll make sure that I do that, and I try to make sure I won't miss anybody. But again, just raise your hand if you want to talk, because if it gets into a free-for-all, Zoom's not very good at that. So let's see if we can make that work for this meeting.
Chris, you should explain how to raise your hand because it's not obvious on the bottom of the screen.
I believe there's, well, I'm the the host, so I don't have that same control. So can someone,
Directly in the center of the screen. If someone glides their modem, or I mean their cursor over the bottom, it will raise the hand. There's a raise a hand symbol right there in the middle.
You have to have the click on list of participants. If you don't have the participants showing, you don't see that.
No, I've got a separate device, which is why I'm echoey. I'll turn it off in a second to see. And I don't see the participants, but there's a raise hand right there in the bottom of the screen.
Okay.
There's not on my screen, but if I click on participants, then I can see either the panelists or the attendees, and there I can see a raise hand feature on the bottom right corner, but I do not see a raise hand feature on the bottom of the screen until I click on the participants.
Because you are a panelist, not an attendee.
Okay.
all right. And then finally, I was reading an article about another community that was having a lot of controversy, as you know, many communities are, with rules and regulations. And one of the city council members made a remark that, you know, in these difficult times, it's really important to be kind to each other. And I think that's I took it to heart, and I think it's something to remember. And we can discuss, we can debate, we can disagree, but we should do it respectively, and let's really try to be kind to each other. These are difficult times. We don't really have much control over a lot of things, but we do have control over how we treat other people. So again, let's try to be kind to each other. And with that, I'll open it up to general public comments to items that are not on the agenda. And I'm going to go from the top to bottom, and it looks like, I believe CTDN is Katja de Neergaard. So, Katja?
Oh, hello. Yes, this is Katja de Neergaard. And I wanted to make a few comments about how things are being run and how this is working with Zoom. Ironically, after President Depe's recent embrace of being kind to one another, I have to say I was very, very shocked at how Director Cyrus Modavi was spoken to at the last meeting, and that Depe called Modavi a liar, and his concerns about Anne Danforth's method of billing was sort of just pushed aside without investigation. And I think in general, Cyrus has been treated very, very badly by the four-board majority, and it hurts me deeply, and it hurts, I think, other people as well. So I think it would be nice if people would be polite and also consider what the other person was saying. I would like to see it looked into what Anne Danforth's billings look like. I heard she doesn't submit hours, but she just sort of submits an amount to be paid, and that doesn't seem right. You know, she can put in whatever she likes, and it's nice that you trust her, but she's also a public official or employee and should have a regular timesheet that she fills in. So, and the other thing is with the Zoom, I'm grateful that there are now, we do have a gallery view of the participants, but I would like it that we could see everybody on the Zoom, you know, the community members as well, to see each other's pictures and, you know, see hands raised. And you wouldn't lose control with that. I'm sure you're familiar with Zoom and know that that's easy to do. So my request would be for more transparency with how the meeting is run in this crisis. And I guess I'm not going to go into it, but I also have a concern about finances and how much is being spent and going into debt with the bond measure. Thank you for listening.
All right, thank you. Oh, and attendees, I'll try to lower your hand after you've spoken. If you don't, I'll do it for you, but it would be nice if you could lower your own hand. Thank you. Carl?
Muted.
Thank you. I don't have anything particular right now. I was just going to put the board on notice that I want to talk about 2 items. And I heard you saying about being nice to people. I'm willing to do this. But if you're not nice to me when I raise my hand like at the previous meeting and you don't call on me, then don't expect me to be nice. So I want to put you on notice that I would like to talk about the minutes and I would like to talk about the budget. And I will raise my hand at the appropriate time.
All right. DELK?
Am I on?
You're on.
Hey, Stephen Still. More and more companies and agencies have been forced by the current regulations to rely on telecommuting. And more are becoming increasingly concerned about security, communications, and data as employees use, in most cases, their personal computers and home internet service provider to access work. In 2019 BC, that's before COVID, most of the district's policy and procedure manual was replaced with an up-to-date one. Within Policy 3000, which relates to district personnel, there is a short 2-sentence policy about telecommuting, namely that it is allowed. In fact, there is more in the manual about conducting district business with a cell phone while driving than with a computer while at home. Has there been consideration to review and expand policy 3183 to address the new reality? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Lynn?
Good evening. I'd like to ditto what Carl had to say. You've given us a homily about kindness, and yet for 2 meetings in a row, you failed to call on me. At one meeting, I was left uncalled on for an hour and a half, and the next one for a good 15 minutes. Secondly, I'd like to know how many people are attending this meeting?
Well, it depends. That comes and goes.
How many right now?
How many right now? It's 23.
23. And then a miscellaneous question. How many of the district's employees are working from home, and how many of them have been given personal computers at the taxpayer's expense?
I don't know. Bill, is that something you can answer?
I can't answer off the top of my head.
I think I can answer that.
Okay,
I think
yeah,
that it's just myself, Bill, Linnell, and Andrea. I've had a laptop since I started at the district, but to be honest, I use my home computer, and I purchased my own printer. I've been using my own ink. I've never asked for reimbursement charges, and I use my own cell phone. I use my own internet service. So nobody's gotten any reimbursements for anything that I know of. So I'd say my laptop and Linnell's laptops are, I think, the only, but those were given when we started working.
Yeah, I can tell you that just for myself, then I don't have any technology of any kind from the district. I'm using my personal equipment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mark?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, this is Mark Altenberg. I'm calling to just give you a quick update on the paths, the Kensington Paths. We have a small group, a steering committee called the Kensington Path Keepers, which is Lisa Corona, David Spath, Rodney Paul, Sarah Paul, and me. And we've been doing a bunch of things lately to sort of publicize the state of the paths and try to get the community, raise the community awareness about the current state of the paths. Rodney Paul has been giving physical tours and now Zoom tours as we shelter in place. The next tour is on July 21st at 5:30 p.m. If you subscribe to our newsletter, which I'll tell you where to get in a moment, you can get notified about that upcoming tour. Rodney is also putting together a scavenger hunt for kids this summer. That's a path scavenger hunt. The kids will go around and find things on the paths and note them and to get some unknown prizes at this point. Keep the kids a little bit busy this summer. We have printed nice path brochures which have a nice map that you can get at Roxico up at the shops or at the Kensington Farmers Market, or you can contact us to get one. Our website is kensingtonpathkeepers.org. It has a lot of information about the paths. And you can subscribe to an occasional newsletter that we put out at that website. Thank you very much for giving me the time to talk. And I hope we can engage in further discussion about ownership of the paths, which is our real focus, is trying to get ownership of the paths, because currently there's no real owner of the paths. Thank you very much.
So I should remind people that this is about items that are under the jurisdiction of the district. Whether the paths are under the jurisdiction, well, they're certainly not under the jurisdiction of the district, but the district has talked about the paths in the past, so.
We actually own the Gore Path.
It's probably okay, so.
The Gore Path.
Cyrus, please, the reason I don't unmute people is so people can talk without being interrupted. Let's be nice to each other, please. Thank you. But I mean, yeah, Mark, thank you for the update. Cyrus, did you want to say something? Cyrus? Cyrus?
No, I just wanted to clarify, we technically own that Gore lot, which has that one path going down it.
All right, thank you.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. But your audio's getting choppy.
Okay.
All right, I want to make sure that.
Is it better?
Oh yeah, that's better. I want to make sure there aren't any. Lynn, you already spoke, so is there anyone else who wants to speak? And I'm not being mean, I'm just following the rules. You get to speak once on an item on the agenda. All right, that's it. Then we'll go to board staff comments. Bill?
Yes, thank you, President Deputy, members of the board and public. Just one item I wanted to report on today, and that's the continuing work on the public safety building. Of note, had a good conversation with Mary Morris Mayorga, the interim general manager for the fire district. And it was a good conversation about next steps to continue the joint work of the districts. And what we specifically focused on is the additional architectural work that needs to get done. I mentioned at the last meeting to get something in front of the county building official to review. And the scope of this extra service request, which is being prepared by the architect, is to understand if there's going to be an elevator required as part of the retrofit, and then also some additional work to determine if the interior space can be increased by extending to the exterior porch area. Some of this you may know, but this is, I'm still learning, so if I'm saying old information, I apologize, but it was, I think it's good progress. We should have that extra service request tomorrow. The fire district has very graciously offered to split the cost of that with the community services district. And so we'll proceed on that basis. That's not something that is official, but that's what Ms. Morris-Mayorga and I discussed. And we are also, we began a conversation, not a lengthy one, about what work we might be able to do together on shared facilities. It's certainly complicated, shared temporary facilities during the construction. It's a little complicated until we get a little bit more from the county building official. But again, good work. And I really appreciate the cooperation of the fire district in keeping this going and getting it going. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions, Mr. President.
Anybody on the board have a question for Cyrus? Can't hear you. Wait a second.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
So two related. One is administratively in some ways also related to the fire district. First one was, so when you say shared facilities, is this administration only, or because there's the facilities where admin's going to go, and then there's also the police facilities itself where we need to have the police department?
Yeah, we didn't talk about it in that specific terms. We did talk specifically about possibilities on the administrative staff, but we didn't really go into detail. It was probably about 2 minutes of an hour-long conversation is all. So there's going to have to be more work done on that.
Because the fire board had brought up at one of their meetings a discussion about maybe using that hardware store, and they'd even, when they had talked about that office space, they had been thinking about it as shared admin space. But yeah.
Yeah, we didn't, again, go into detail, but we are doing some research on that. And, you know, frankly, I think that if that can get worked out and it benefits both of the agencies, then by all means, it's an alternative that should be looked at, I think, by both agencies.
So if you're talking about facility, when do we start talking about the police facility? That is actually operationally our primary concerns too. And my understanding is the police, as I said before, they have a lead time on this. It's not like they're going to pack up and leave the day of.
Yeah, Director Modavi, I missed the first part, but the last part I heard is that there definitely is a lead time, I think, for both agencies to move out. But once I'm not too concerned about it yet, I guess, because once we get some definition from the county building official and something that the architect can work with, they still have to prepare construction drawings and then submit for permit and then go out to bid and so forth. So there will be time, not dawdling around, but there will be some time to get some temporary facilities going. But you're right, there's going to be lead time. It's not uncomplicated to move a police department.
And I guess the first part was, when did you imagine that happening?
When would we?
Like, we would actually get around to discussing about our options for the police department, because so far there's been discussion of the annex, which I don't know where that's coming from, given the annex was only assigned to say it could only handle administration. And then if it's a 6-month or a 4-month lead time, we probably want to be getting on that before we're at that crunch point.
I agree, we should. And there's no reason that conversation can't start pretty quickly. But I would like a little bit more definition of where we're going on the public safety building. I think that'll help in the discussion about what type of facility we look at in the interim.
I'm just curious why. That's my last question, because moving out the police department is not dependent on what goes on in that building. We know we have to vacate it 100% anyway.
We know we'll have to vacate it 100%, but what we don't know is, at this point, we don't know for sure if we'll have to vacate it permanently or temporarily. We don't have yet a design that works, even a conceptual design that works for both agencies. And I think that's the goal that everybody's working for. But if it falls through, then we have to take a different approach.
Okay, and then I guess the second item, which was, I think, hopefully it's not too far off base, is fire season's coming, and this sort of goes back to hopefully the part that got cut off in the first part of the audio. We own that gore lot, and I was just wondering at what point do we need to make sure it needs to be pruned down, like the gore path that goes along there, because it just was getting a bit weedy, and I wouldn't want us to accidentally get cited in the abatement.
Yeah, Director Modavi, this is actually the first I've heard of that, so I'm going to have to do a little research on it. I really don't know the answer to that question, but if it's something we own and it's a fire hazard, then I think we need to get on it right away.
Okay, this was administrative, and then I'll leave. I don't want to take too long. I noticed that we posted a search for a general manager, and that like the description and all that things went up. I thought in the process of searching for a GM, the board has to agree on all the parameters they're looking for and what our things look like. Like, I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing it, but I'm asking, when did all these descriptions and what the board agreed on as the parameters were decided?
They haven't been. It's really a bit of a work in progress, and you'll see it coming up on probably your next agenda for a discussion about that. The need to advertise the position and also the police chief position is a requirement by CalPERS for when you have a retired annuitant in that position. You should it's necessary to be looking for a replacement. So, but nothing is said in concrete. That is a bit of a placeholder, but it's something that we certainly want the board to comment on.
Okay, I was just curious about what was going on there. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Anybody else have questions, comments for Bill? Bill, did you want to take any questions from the public?
I'd be glad to, President Deppy, if you think that's...
Anybody in the public would like to ask Bill something? David?
Can you
David?
hear at this point? Oh, good. I have a question about the community center. What is going on with it at this time, and what's the schedule for its opening?
I can tell you what's happening right now is I think it's the final piece of work, and that's to install the audio visual equipment. And I don't know what the status is of the punch list. I think they must be getting down to finishing that up, because it wasn't a real extensive punch list. In terms of an opening, I may defer this to Directors Sheriswad and Hasai. We certainly can't do a large grand opening in the current with the current public health orders, and I think there's an interest in doing that. It might be able to, depending on what the public health orders provide, it might be something that can be used for some purposes, but we haven't really sat down and defined that yet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Katya?
Yes, this is Katya de Niergaard again. Mr. Lindsay, I'm wondering if we could have a monthly profit and loss statement published on the website again. It sort of got lost with the previous administration, but it's tremendously helpful for letting the community know what's going on with the finances and what we're spending money on.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I don't want to put words in Ms. Korsak's mouth, but I know she has mentioned wanting to do that, to actually have a monthly close of each and every month and to have that posted.
Oh, great.
So I think she would agree that that's a good idea. We'll see if she nods her head.
Yes, yes, I agree. I think you can also find all the most recent documents on the Finance Committee page.
Great, I'll look.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Thank you. Thank you
You're
both.
welcome.
No more questions from the public? All right. Board and staff, board comments, or I'm sorry, Catherine, did you have anything you wanted to say, your staff?
I've just been working hard on the budgets and we just about completed the audit also. So I think we will be presenting that at the next board meeting.
Great. All right. I just have one comment. I just want to clarify, Anne does break down her time by hour and by project. So
only
it's
by hour. It's
Pardon?
like four general categories, but beyond that, no one knows what else is going on.
It's very, very specific that she, Anne, can you speak to that, please? Wait a second. I think Anne's been talked about, so she should be able to answer the questions. Go ahead.
Okay, I am unmuted.
Yes.
So every bill has essentially two components. There's the attorney-client privilege component, which contains the detailed work and says how much I spent on the various tasks. That goes to the manager. The business manager and the president of the board get the more general statement, which is the one, Cyrus, that you're describing, that shows where the categories are and how much time I've spent on each category, but doesn't contain the details about the work that I've been doing. So the general manager does have that information.
Great, thank you. All right, non-president board comments?
I mean, I will just make a comment that if this turns into a mad dash about housing the police, I've said my piece on it.
All right. Rochelle, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to address David Bergen's comment about the community center. We're hoping to allow it for rentals, but really that's up to the community, the county right now. We must follow the health order. And before we can allow people to be in there, we need to have clear policy that establishes cleanliness and usage rules. So hopefully that'll be coming up with more clarity in conversation with John Joya's office, so we can see as things evolve. And then folks will have to understand that even if we, quote unquote, open up the community center to maybe groups of 10 or groups of 12, or maybe even a socially distanced group of 50, that may change here in the coming months. So we'll present information as quickly as we can. But as Mr. Lindsay said, right now, the last work is being completed, so it's not ready yet to be occupied.
Great. Sylvia?
Yeah, hi.
Okay.
As this item is not on the agenda, I did want to raise directly with the chief some concerns that have been brought to my attention by Kensington residents. And I will just read part of some emails that I have received and allow the chief to comment on this. I think there was a real appreciation for your tackling of the use of force issue, and we look forward to seeing the, the complete review of the policy manual. But there have been, over the years, certainly Kensington has suffered from a reputation of let's just say, potentially unequal treatment of minority groups as they drive through town or are through town. And some of that is a result of residents who may find the presence of certain people in town unusual for some reason, not that I'm saying it's valid, and call in suspicion. Sometimes it's not about that. And the person who wrote to me said, the use of force, and I would like to see if we get a use of force report. As I understand, we're required to have one every year. That's something I think you said you would work on. But the use of force complaints are not things that most residents have heard about, just not on their radar. But this particular resident wrote that, what she does know is that over time, the KPD has repeatedly detained and questioned people of color for no reason other than a resident's call. We could speculate for days about the motivations behind these calls, but the important point is that people do call the police when they see folks, as she says, just being Black in Kensington. It happens and we need to have a plan for managing it. In particular cases that she personally recalled, 2 male relatives of a Black Kensington Hilltop student, uncles she thought were visiting from out of town and were detained and questioned by the KPD, by the library. They were attempting to walk up to school to meet the kids and walk them home. The second case that she recalled was a Black El Cerrito High School student who came to a speech and debate practice here in Kensington on a Sunday afternoon and was stopped and questioned by the KPD while skateboarding down the street on his way home. I can say that I have personal knowledge of a case, and again, these are my instances years old under Chief Harmon, where a African-American employee of a business here was stopped multiple times, even after it was clear who he was and where he was going and that he worked here. And then another time as he was helping a coworker who was a Hispanic female changing a tire, they were harassed to the point that the business owner finally walked into the chief's office and asked it to stop. And, you know, for people of color, we know, if we didn't before, we certainly know that being stopped and questioned by police is at best humiliating and at worst terrifying. I would like to see Kensington Police discuss this publicly and pledge to do better. For example, you know, what could be done if a resident calls and there's no other suspicious behavior other than their ethnicity or skin color? And I think that, you know, an explicit statement or policy would be good to understand how that's going to be dealt with. And I'm particularly interested also on the issue of, you know, a resident calls and the dispatch, you know, will have to ask certain questions as to what kind of suspicious behavior they're reporting. But then what does the police do in that interaction? Is it their responsibility to make contact with that person, or do they make contact with the resident to understand better what's going on in the case where it may not be so clear cut? So I'd like to raise this because it's obviously an issue of the day. It is not, it's things that have been discussed probably somewhat quietly in Kensington, if not loudly, but they are being raised to me very strongly. I want to give the chief a chance to speak to that.
Rochelle, your hand's raised, but I'm assuming that's just a remnant, right?
And I will also just say that I have a very strong remembrance of a particular resident who told me he was glad that when I was campaigning 4 years ago, I can remember that I walk by this house all the time. He was glad that the police racially profiled people. So.
Nice.
So I would like the chief to respond to that and give him an opportunity.
The chief's muted.
I'm trying to get him. There you go.
I'm unmuted. Okay, thank you for the question or questions. First of all, I'm not aware of any of those types of incidents while I've been chief. If there has been, I would appreciate a call so I could investigate that immediately. And I'm unaware of any of those incidents occurring when Chief Simpkins was here. If there was, I would really like to know about it and I would like to investigate it. Now there's specific guidelines that police officers have to go through. We have a departmental policy on contacts and temporary detentions. And I'll just read you what it takes to stop a person. You can either stop a person through a consensual encounter, which the person has to know that it's a consensual stop and they can leave at any time. And then there's where the officer actually detains a person and they need reasonable suspicion. And this is word for word what our departmental policy says. It's a 4-page document. I'll just read this one paragraph. It says, when under the totality of circumstances, an officer has articulable facts that criminal activity may be afoot and a particular person is connected with that possible criminal activity. So an officer just cannot stop somebody for riding their bicycle down the street unless they commit some kind of traffic infraction or not. Now, if a resident calls and there is no other facts other than the person's walking down the street, that officer should not stop that person unless he calls the resident and finds out there's other articulable facts, like he went and looked in a window at a residence, he was looking in cars as he's walking down the street at 2 o'clock in the morning. There's got to be something more than just walking down the street. And then we also have, as I've mentioned before in other community meetings, is that we have a bias-based policing departmental order. It's quite specific. And again, I'll just read a couple paragraphs because it's lengthy, but bias-based policing is an inappropriate reliance on characteristics such as race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, economic status, age, cultural group, disability, or affiliation with any non-criminal group as the basis for providing differing law enforcement service or enforcement. Now, with this policy, it also states in there that if any officer sees another officer violate this policy, he is required to report that to the supervisor, just like in our use of force report. I would like people out there, when they have a situation where they believe that an officer is stopping somebody for the color of their skin, that they report it to me immediately. Every officer, like I've said before, has a camera on, a body-worn camera, so every stop is going to be recorded. He has to articulate why he stopped that person, and he has to give that reasonable suspicion to make it a lawful detention, or it has to be a consensual encounter. And the consensual encounter will demonstrate on the body-worn camera by the actions of the officer and the action of the person he is stopping. So I encourage people to contact me directly if they believe something is not right with the police department, or something that an officer stopped somebody for no reason. I can easily look into that, investigate it, and either find that there's been a violation of departmental policy, or find that there's a reasonable explanation for what occurred. For some of these things, there may be a reasonable explanation. For other these examples that I heard, there may not be. You don't have all the circumstances of the details of the call. All you hear is rumor, and I've heard a lot of rumors since everything's been going on. I even heard a rumor that police departments are allowed to hire people that are in an extremist organization. That has, as long as I've been a cop, that's never been the case. So there's a lot of rumors out there. And if you just come directly to the source, I will be happy to sit down and talk to you and explain the situation and investigate whatever you have concerns about. That's what I'm here for, and I encourage it. Instead of putting it off on social media, first give me a chance to investigate it and take appropriate action. And if I don't, go to your board, go to the general manager and complain. I have no problem with that.
Thank you. And again, I don't think these are recent incidents, so I just want to bring them up. And you mentioned body-worn cameras, and obviously that's a new policy here in Kensington and a new piece of equipment that we've invested in to provide, the up-to-date police services that we would like to provide to our residents. What do you know offhand? What is there a regular review of footage or any kind of audit that's done just kind of randomly?
Yes, there's random audits on. I have one person assigned to the cameras, and he randomly audits those videos. He doesn't look at all of them, and when there's a complaint, of course, I will look at that video footage.
And as to your knowledge, in the time you've been here, has that been happening?
Yes.
Thank you.
In fact, his duties is also to erase accidental recordings when the officer forgot to turn it off, and there's a private conversation between two people. He is to, with my permission and only with my permission, to erase that, so we don't violate anybody's privacy.
Perhaps you're aware that that was a particular interest today, that type of incident.
I'm not.
There was a case in on the East Coast, perhaps in one of the Carolinas, where several officers were heard making quite disgusting racist remarks during a private conversation that was captured, by mistake in a way by the cameras, and it was through that review that those comments were discovered, and it was actually that led to their immediate firing.
Yes, that type of recording would not be erased. That's a violation of our policy, as I just read.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to bring these concerns of people in the community to you directly.
Thank you.
Meryl, I see you have your hand raised, but this really isn't an agenda item. If you have a question for Walt, I guess we could let it go. But other than that, I would say just contact the board or the general manager if you've got another question. So I'll let you talk, but again, this is not an agenda item. If you've got a question for Walt, I think it's fair if you've got something. Meryl?
It's just a comment for Walt that Walt and I have met about discussing how to make our police department a real model for the community policing world. And I think he has plans for that in the future. And I hope all of us can look to the future and not to the past, because we are really transforming our police and what we can do in the community. And that would be a message to get out to people.
Right, thank you. Okay, now on the consent calendar, and I had a discussion with Bill about how to, well, first, why don't you introduce the consent calendar, Bill, and then I can explain how public comments will work on this.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. In addition to the minutes, which is a routine item, we do have 4 items which we deem to be non-controversial administrative items to place on the consent calendar. And the consent calendar is something that without the board removing it or at the discretion of the chair, if the public would like to speak on it, the consent calendar can be handled with one motion of the board. And the idea is to focus your time then on discussion items and determination items. So again, these 4 items, there are 2 resolutions that are required administratively by CalPERS, renewal of the dispatch contract with the City of Albany for dispatch services, and removal of well, actually changing signatures on a stale bank account for the purposes of closing it. So, but that does require board approval. So those are the consent items in addition to the minutes.
Right, and so I thought it'd be best to allow the public, well, first, are there any board just questions about the consent calendar before I allow public comment, and then we discuss either adopting it or pulling items? Does anybody have any questions, Rochelle? Sorry, let me. Yep.
Quick question for Anne. Anne, on, excuse me, I have these marked separately. On, I believe it's item 4, the contract with the City of Albany. My one question was that the previous agreement stated that the CPI would be, I'm sorry, the annual increase would be the CPI, but the original contract stated that it was the CPI or 5%, whichever was lower. And I just wanted to make sure that the wording of the resolution allowed for the original interpretation, the first agreement, that it was CPI or 5%.
Mute myself. Okay. I did actually read for that issue. All it does is reset the dates, and all the amendment does is reset the dates beginning July 1st, and then set a different baseline. The escalation formula will be the same.
Okay, great. That's all I just wanted.
Or 5%, whichever's lower.
Great. That was my only point of clarification. Thank you.
I'm laughing at the cat. Okay. So I thought what we would do is let the public comment, and then the board can decide if we want to pull items or discuss items. So first, let's get some public comments. Looks like Carl, you had your hand raised first. Carl, can you talk?
Yeah, I want to talk about the minutes. Okay.
Sure.
Okay. On page 4, there's a motion that says, motion made and seconded and passed 5-0 to extend the meeting until 9:30. Now, I remember the meeting, and the motion that was made was to extend the meeting by half an hour. The half an hour gets us until 10 o'clock, and 10:30. Now, at 10:34, the board passed the motion on a customer proposal. And what I think is that the customer proposal was done when there was no official meeting, because you did not extend the meeting in time to do this. You went beyond the 10:30, and you never extended the meeting again until after the customer proposal. And therefore, I think it is not legal. And I want to remind you that I still do not feel that I need to be nice to anyone, because I was not treated nicely at the last meeting. And I don't like that when somebody does not call on me when I want to be called on. I have attended these meetings for 10 years or more, and I have paid my dues by being on the finance committee and being a good citizen. And I do not enjoy it when people ignored me. So I would like an answer on the motion that's on page 4.
All right.
Are we pulling this item to begin discussion on it, or I thought we
Well, that's we're going to listen to the public comments, and then the board can decide which ones we want to pull.
I thought it was we pull it and I thought like how it sounds, you pull everything and then you discuss those, like this residents or board pull the items.
Yeah, the problem is that this said we only pull 3 items and public wanted to discuss a 4th item, then they don't have a chance to discuss it. So this lets the public talk about any of the items, whether they get pulled or not, and then we can decide what to pull.
But the public can request to pull things themselves.
No, the board pulls items. The public can request it, but that's what we're giving them a chance to do right now. And Carl, I guarantee you I did not intentionally ignore you. I guarantee you that. I apologize if I didn't see your hand raised. Lynn.
Yes, I had my hand raised to comment about the paths, and you told me I couldn't speak again. So I wanted to remind you, I believe that the district also owns the path between Highland and Kenyon. So that's something that perhaps Bill Lindsay should look into with the path people. As far as the consent items, the interim contract or the contract for the interim police chief, there was mention previously that given the PERS requirements that a search for a permanent police chief needs to be conducted. I'm wondering, when will that process begin? It's been years since we've had a permanent police chief.
Is that everything, Lynn?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Second here. All right. DELK?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Concerning the minutes and the terms of the newly elected director, it is stated that Mr. Lindsay said in the minutes that it would begin on January 1st. That is exactly what he said, but it's not correct. According to California Code 61042, the term begins at noon on the first Friday of December. Perhaps there should be a note in the June 11th minutes to this effect. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so that's well. I'll start. I agree that the minutes should be pulled. Let's see if there's any other items anybody wants to pull. Rochelle? Oh, sorry, Cyrus. Go ahead.
I'd like to pull two and 3 and 5, mostly for questions related to them.
So we got 1, 2, 3, 5. Anybody want 4? No.
She's muted and.
I'm gonna just keep yourself unmuted for now. That's probably the simplest.
Okay,
right.
thanks. I was muted by the host for whatever reason. I had a question about on the dispatch contract, and this is probably a question for Chief Schold regarding the prioritized response per the Albany Lexipol policy. I assume that you've reviewed that and find it acceptable. Is there anything you'd like to say about that particular prioritization? And does it match? Do we have a policy of our own on prioritization, and does it match?
I have not reviewed that policy yet. Is there a specific question that you want on that?
No, not really. I expect it to be. It hasn't changed, obviously. This is from the old contract, so no, it hasn't changed. So it's not new. So that's fine, actually.
Oh, you're talking about the contract and not our response time in the department orders?
Correct. I'm just, it says in the contract.
Yes, I did do that. Yeah.
Okay. And you're comfortable with that, I assume?
Yes, I am.
And then also it talks about quarterly meetings. Now, you haven't been here very long. I don't know if Chief Simpkins briefed you on these quarterly meetings, if it's a chief level meeting or another member of the department is representing Kensington, or the general, I guess the general manager is the authorized representative, if there have been any meetings on the dispatch contract since you or Mr. Lindsay have been here.
There has not been. I've been in regular contact with the chief there, and but neither one of us have had problems with them dispatching, or our officers have not had any problem with their dispatching.
Right. I mean, it does have quarterly meetings that the managers can designate, obviously, the chiefs to have. And if you're in regular contact, that's wonderful. It's just good to know that there's a possibility for more sustained discussions.
Yes.
And I think if we're going to be discussing other things, and that's probably really all I had. Thank you.
So does anybody want to pull item 4? Or are we going to, is that okay for the consent calendar?
Or Rochelle's hand is raised.
I think it's a remnant. Rochelle, do you?
Oh, it was merely to comment on item 1. So if we're there.
All right, so let's start with the minutes. And I'll second the issue that the first extension was extending the meeting to 10:30, not beyond 9:30. So that's the comment I have about minutes. Who else has a comment about the minutes?
I have a comment. I made the point that the pension obligation bonds would be problematic if the return of CalPERS would be lower than the bond interest rate. My comment isn't reflected, and Dan Masiello from Cosmot admitted that it would be problematic if that occurred, especially in the first year, and I'd like the minutes to reflect that concern.
All right. Rochelle, did you have something to
say?
Well,
my notation for Carl's concern, I mean, I think that if we could check to absolutely verify, but I am 99.9% sure that we extended the meetings properly as we should have before voting. And as you can see, according to the minutes, we extended to 10:30. There was more discussion. We extended the meeting to 11, and then it was moved. Then we made motions. Then you'll see we extended the meeting to 11:15 when we were on item 5. So I firmly believe that everything was done correctly and that we were always extending the meetings before votes were taken. But in the interest of accuracy, I'm happy to listen to that moment when those motions were passed.
I think it's imperative to listen and make sure, because if the motion was passed after the meeting, that's a critical issue.
Absolutely, that's fine. But
I also, sorry.
Go ahead.
So 2 items. One is the motions aren't verbatim. And I went back and listened to one of the motions. I think it was at 2 hours, 15 seconds. And it was that we move that we vote on. Did we actually move to adopt, or did we move to vote on? I'm just wondering if that's that sounds like a parliamentary thing. That would be, because I think the fire board had this thing also happen to them once about the parliamentary language.
Where are you?
Why usually the motions are verbatim.
Where in the minutes are we?
This was for actually approving the bonds. So, I mean, the timestamp I have it at is 2 hours, 57 and 15 seconds. It was moved that we vote on after I said, like, let's just call the question on this.
So the minutes.
I mean, I'm just raising that right now, if that matters as a parliamentary thing, because, you know, I heard it's slightly different than an adoption motion, but I'm just raising that flag as a concern, and which is why I believe usually the motions are taken verbatim, so you don't have interpretation of what the actual motion was.
You're talking about the move that I made and you seconded to adopt the resolution?
Well, I know the language you used was like I went and listened to it, and maybe I'm getting it wrong, which is why I'm generally like I've heard there's a reason why we write these things verbatim. The language, at least I heard, was move that we vote on. So I could be wrong, and maybe I'm just conflating multiple things. I just want to flag that.
Okay. I have a correction if that's appropriate at this time.
Sure.
I believe that in the page 5 of the minutes, in the motion that we're talking about, Director Nottoli's vote is misrepresented. She's listed as an aye and an abstention. So in that resolution, I believe that she was the abstention on the bond. She was not. She voted aye for the policy, but abstained on the bond, and that should be corrected.
Isn't that what it says in the minutes?
It says ayes, and it includes her in the ayes, and it includes her in the abstained, and she is not an aye. She was an abstention.
We need a
separate... I got it. You're right.
Page 5.
You're right. I see what you're saying.
And then, are we still processing this before I speak?
Yeah, let's get rid of the minutes. Be done with it. Any more comments on the minute?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I just sort of wanted to say that, like, and this has been a consistent thing, it's like these minutes expand and seem to arbitrarily expand and contract in their detail for different things. Like discussions of contracting out of the public safety building get like almost no airtime, yet this has like even charts in it. And like, that isn't fair to the community. And if this is like, if you're going to be taking minutes where it's almost like distorting what is important or what was discussed, it's not fair, because it gives us time warp and says that certain things were not getting airtime when other things weren't. And that's not true, because a lot of the things that got massive airtime are only represented in the minutes as a single motion. So like
what are you referring to in this specific minutes, the public safety building? You're referring to incidents in the past?
Well, like the minutes in general, like, yeah, going through this, and this is just one more example of that there seems to be no consistency in how minutes are being taken. And it's just very curious what gets expanded and what doesn't.
Oh, I would disagree. I think they're actually superior and terrific minutes. And I found that so thus far, especially last month and this month, I think they very accurately reflect the conversations that happen and the fact that item 4 took probably 2.5 hours to discuss. I think, or 2 hours maybe. I think that is well reflected.
I mean, like on other items, the contracting out got well over 2 hours or an hour and a half or more.
I would ask the chair to end this discussion because it's no longer on these particular minutes.
Do we take, I guess, do we take public comments and move to adopt or not?
We already took comments on the on all these, remember? That was the point, with that people comment on it and then the board can start doing their business. So do I have a motion about the minutes?
Well, I thought, aren't we approving the consent calendar in general? And can't we do one motion to approve the entire consent calendar?
Well, there's only one motion that hasn't been pulled. The minutes.
I think once it's been pulled, we have to approve it separately, don't we?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Pardon me.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes for the regular board meeting of June 11th, 2020 with corrections as identified by Director Hasai, Director Nottoli, and that we, Director Mahdavi, considering the time, and that, anyway, that's the motion.
And language.
And then we'll ask staff to look into timing of the motions to extend meetings.
And what was actually motion?
Next meeting.
And what was actually motion? Like, was it that we moved that we vote on, or that we move to adopt?
All right, and that was as well. And the clarification on what the language was on resolution 2020-8.
All right. Do you have a second?
I'll second the motion.
All right. Roll call. Cyrus?
No.
Sylvia?
Yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
Eileen?
I think that there's a number of important issues with this, and I think the issue on the time is very critical. So I think that needs to be resolved before I can vote on it. So I will abstain.
And I'll vote yes. So that's 3 yeses, 1 no, and 1 abstention. All right, item number 3, consider resolution. Cyrus, you wanted to pull that?
Yeah, I just had a process question, and then like that's about it really. I mean, I was going off of how we normally have done this in the past, where we pull everything and then discuss it, but well, like the prior boards had done. So I was wondering, like, on the timing of this, like, I understand what happened with the general manager contract, yes, but I was wondering, like, for the police contract, why this didn't come up then when we voted for it at that meeting? Like, it's like these things had to be ratified together, like we're then going back in time to fix something.
So do you have an objection to the actual resolution?
No, I'm trying to ask a question of, like, why is this coming now and why didn't it come earlier if it was needed? Like, 'cause I'm trying to just understand, like, wouldn't we, once we approve the contract, also move the resolution to send it to CalPERS and not 2 months later?
I think it was an oversight, and we did send them the minutes from that meeting, but the requirement is a resolution be posted on our site. So just to be safe, we'd like to have these resolutions up so that we're not violating any of the CalPER annuitant rules or regulations. So, so Chief Schuld has already been totally approved by CalPERS, and he's also been approved for the COVID. They've lifted the 960 hours requirement because of COVID. So they've also approved that for him. But we just want to be extra cautious. So that's why that's how I understand it. And that's why we're doing both those resolutions. Okay. But you are correct. They should have been done in the past.
Okay, that was, yeah, we seem to be doing that a lot recently, but anyway, so that's really it. Other than that, I have nothing else to add to this.
I assume, is that also the same for, wait a second. No, you didn't want to, you wanted to pull 2 as well?
Yeah, 2 and 3 together because they were essentially the same. It was the same
question?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
So, yeah.
So let's, do I have a motion? Since they're pulled, we have to vote on it. A motion about item 2?
I'll make a motion that the board adopt resolution number 2020-11, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District, approving the appointment of Interim General Manager William A. Lindsay.
Do I have a second?
Second? Oh, are you?
Yeah, it's okay. All right, Michelle seconded it. Cyrus?
Aye.
Sylvia?
Aye.
Michelle?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Eileen?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So that's 5-0. And then do I have a motion for item number 3?
I'll make the motion just to keep things simple, if you don't mind. I vote that the board adopt a resolution confirming the appointment of Interim Police Chief Walter Schold as required by CalPERS. And it's resolution number 2020-12, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District approving the appointment of Interim Police Chief Walter Schold.
Have a second? Okay, Cyrus seconds. Cyrus?
Aye.
Sylvia?
Aye.
Phil?
Yes, if you said Rochelle, sorry.
Eileen?
Yes.
And I vote yes, so that's also 5-0. 4 will be on the consent calendar. And then number 5. So my only question on number 5, I'm assuming we're pulling that also?
Yeah.
Okay, good. This was an account for asset forfeiture. Some, asset forfeiture has some very negative connotations, and I'm just curious, what are we doing with an asset forfeiture account? Well,
that's not a. Excuse me. That's a mistake. That's a property and evidence account.
Okay.
I didn't catch that, but yeah, that's a property and evidence account.
Okay, great. And then we're just going to close it and give it to the county, right?
Yes, it's going to be a different line item, and there's specific rules when we have property that's money that we have to advertise it if it's over $15, and then if it's not claimed, then it's released into that fund.
And this is, I take it right now, we have not seen the bank statements for this account?
I have reviewed the bank statements this week.
Catherine and Bill, have you seen them?
I have seen the last few bank statements, yes.
I mean,
Yeah,
from the
one of
beginning.
the most recent was attached here.
From the beginning? Sorry.
I'm sorry, I think the most recent one is attached.
Yeah.
I mean, have we done an audit from the very beginning of the account?
No.
No.
I would request that we do that before we close it.
Yeah, I think Catherine was planning on doing that. I'm going to look it over, then Catherine's going to do the actual audit, I believe.
Okay.
Yes, we'll review it before we close it, and
Okay.
it will be it'll be the same type of account with the county. I actually spoke to them today about this account, and they will open a Wells Fargo account. It's mainly keeping it at the county, allows for continuity of the account. If employees aren't here anymore, then there's always a county employee that's on that account, so that the district always has access to those funds if needed. So that's one of the purposes. The other is it's a good financial control. And the last is the county really doesn't want us to have any outside accounts. They want to know about all of our, we're supposed to have all of our money within their bank accounts. So.
Rochelle, did you have a question?
No, and I'm sorry if I have my hand up.
Cyrus, did you have anything?
This is for Schultz, and I guess also for any of staff. Is this like I believe this is like a police-specific account. It's not actually useful for going into the district's general usage?
No, it's in our policy that that account is used for property and evidence related expenses.
So yeah, like specific to just the police, it cannot be drawn into the general fund for other purposes.
That's correct, unless the board decides otherwise.
Okay.
And where does the money come from?
Comes from found property, seizures of evidence that case has been adjudicated and the person doesn't pick up the money. Anything that has to do with money.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Does anybody know how long this account has been in existence?
A very long time, because I think it goes back past Harmon's, what I've heard, because it is like a police function.
I think I have statements back to 2007, I believe.
Oh, okay. So, but yeah, no, because I'd heard later, but I could be wrong.
A decent amount of money.
It probably is. That's the only statements I have, though.
It's a decent amount of money, and it kind of goes against the idea that crime doesn't pay.
And I guess the question is, if it's a police-specific account, why can't we just update with just the police, with the specialist and the chief, and have them close and then transfer to the county? Why does it need to become a district thing where even a director is listed?
I think we're just going to do that. There hasn't been an audit done on the account, and so we're just going to do the audit, and then the appropriate people will be placed on the account to draw from that.
Additionally, the police staff doesn't have a finance and accounting person on staff, so that would fall under my jurisdiction, I believe, or responsibility.
I think it's both financial controls and administrative convenience.
Okay, but then like, why do you need a director? Because like generally elected officials don't get involved in the monies. The transmissal form is as far as we usually go.
That's questions for me.
I'm for the general manager.
It doesn't have to be. Again, that's the administrative convenience more than anything else. I think there are some financial transactions. I could be wrong. I haven't observed all the internal controls as they work, but I think some things do require or have required a director's signature. And typically one would do that when there's turnover in the general manager position or another position. You'd have the director step in and sign.
Yeah, because that was our original transmissal form system. 2 directors sign, transfer that out.
Right.
And then staff sort of took that all over, you know, especially given the current circumstances.
Anne, you had a comment?
Yes, I wanted to speak to Director Mondavi's earlier question about why the district rather than the police department had control of the money. And the police department, although in many ways it acts independently, it's not. It's part of the district entity. It doesn't have any independent legal status. So just as when somebody sues the police officer, it's not the police department that defends it, it's the district. The district is the one who holds all the assets. The district is the one who has the ability to dispose or use them, even if we're restricted in how we can do that. Does that make sense?
Yes, I was just asking about, like, I understand that we own the police. Well, no, excuse me. We own the account in the bubble sense that we run all the finances. But I was just asking, like, from the administrative level, if we need to close it out and it's technically their small pot that's to dedicate the police. Yes, we do put a staff member on it. Anyway, if we're tabling this because we need to audit it.
And just to also answer or to clear things up further, once this money is transferred into the Wells Fargo account at the county, I believe that it'll fall under the same transmittal. So every board member has signature authority, you know, on this account. So it's just like our other, you know, all the other accounts at the county. It won't be any different from that.
Okay, I guess the question is, are we voting on this now or are we waiting for it to undergo an audit first?
No, I think I would like to vote on it personally.
But like, didn't we just say we should audit it to just go through the statements first before we do that?
Well, I think that should be part of a motion, I would imagine.
So, and also to be clear, we cannot contact Wells or Mechanics Bank. We can't talk to them. So in order to really do a proper audit, we'd need to contact the bank, and we can't do that right now.
Okay.
Let me, where is that? I'm just trying to find, where is a resolution here? So I'll make a resolution, movement. I move that we adopt resolution number 2020-13, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District approving removal of Kevin Hart and Andrea DiNapoli as named individuals on the Mechanics Bank property account and adding Board President Chris Deppe, Interim General Manager William A. Lindsay, Chief Walter Schult, and Finance and Business Manager Catherine Corsack to the account, with the addition that we do a full audit of the account before closing it. Do I have any
motion?
Okay. Dr. Madavi?
Aye.
Dr. Hasai?
Aye.
Dr. Saraswat?
Aye.
Dr. Nottoli?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So that's 5-0. And then finally, consent calendar.
Should we just adopt the resolution in its own motion? I'm happy to do number 4 if that's.
All right, well, let's just pull item 4 as well. And this, someone make a motion for item 4?
I shall, well, hold on, sorry, one moment. Grab the resolution, the item. Is there a resolution or it's just an extension? I apologize.
An amendment, I guess.
The motion would be to approve the amendment to the contract.
I approve the amendment to the, I make a motion that we approve the amendment to the contract with the City of Albany Police Department to provide dispatch services to the Kensington Police Department, extending the term for 3 years in an amount not to exceed $105,000 in year 1, with annual CPI increases in year 2 or year 3, or the percentage increase rate of 5%, whichever is the lesser.
I'll second the motion.
All right. Cyrus?
Aye.
Sylvia?
Aye.
Michelle?
Aye.
Eileen?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So 5-0. Great. Okay. Now to the main event, the budget. Item number 6, review the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District proposed fiscal year 2020-2021 budget and provide direction to staff. Bill or Catherine, who wants to take this on?
This one belongs to Ms. Corsack.
Okay, Catherine, you're up.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us this evening to review the 2020-2021 proposed budget. The heading, first of all, I want to just make sure I correct a few things. The heading on each page should be Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District. And a few other things about the presentation to note of this document. The final version will have a general narrative report for our from our interim general manager, Bill Lindsay. And it will also have narrative reports on the Parks and Rec Department and the Solid Waste Department. Additionally, all the yellow highlighted accounts throughout the document are the newly added accounts that I also explained in the narrative explanation of budget presentation changes. To go into that, we've made some changes to how income and expenses are allocated with the goal of helping our departments follow their budgets and hopefully so that each department has a surplus at the end of the year or as close to zero, but that they're not starting out the year in the red. I think I'm going to start, and I will also add a table of contents once the final version is complete. So I'm going to start, if any people have copies and they want to follow along, I'll refer to the page numbers that I'm at. Page number 4 is the narrative explanation of the budget presentation changes. This document basically lists the 37 new accounts that we've added. There are only really a few new amounts. The new amounts are the pension obligation bond payment. That is replacing the UAL. The traffic safety account, account 554 is new. Vehicle fuel is just split out. Vehicle lease is a new account, an actual addition. Alarm expense is just split out more clearly, but it was included in previous accounts. Storage is also, I'm just splitting it out. Records is being split out. The post reimbursement, it's really important to split out reimbursements so that we can track those exactly and always know that we have, a balance and we need to get reimbursed from post. The IT contract with Rubicon always, in the past, it all resided in account 810, and we're splitting that between the police department and the administration department, especially because more recently when we upgraded all of our IT and our email program and Office 365, it's more expensive, and so the cost is more evenly broken out between the two departments, and so that's a little bit higher amount, I think, than we never had an IT contract in the police department prior. General liability insurance is being split between the three. I'm sorry. I will actually go back to that when I talk about general liability. Volunteer programs is a new account. General maintenance is also new. And these are in the Parks Department now. So the 600 accounts are all the parks. Landscaping is new. General liability and workers' comp is combined here, but it's allocated across these departments. Rental expense would be small rental expenses that we incur, but hopefully we won't have many, because hopefully if it's rented, the people renting it will make up for all the expenses. Very small amount in miscellaneous. One of the big reasons of having all these accounts is to avoid using any miscellaneous accounts. General maintenance is a new account, but it's not a new amount. It was used to be included in the 672 account. So it was just all kind of lumped together into that account. The 652 repairs account also used to be included in the 672 account. Landscaping was in 672. So 672 for the parks kind of just functioned as a miscellaneous parks account. Janitorial supplies, rental, utilities are broken out, and that just is really just the water, mainly the water, East Bay Mud. General liability is also allocated across parks. Levy administration is broken out. That used to be lumped into the miscellaneous 672 account. And then we're just budgeting a very small amount for miscellaneous. For the administration expenses, we're also breaking those out. So all the 816 through the 861, those also all pretty much used to be in the 868, or I'm sorry, 898 miscellaneous account. So, so basically, in the past, as I said, the income and the expenses weren't allocated to have each department function in the surplus. So the police department will receive 63% of the general levy tax. They'll also receive account 401 plus all the, the general levy tax is account 401 plus all the designated police income accounts 402 through 418. The Parks and Recreation Department will receive 6% of the general levy tax and income accounts 424 and 427. And the district administration will receive 31% of the general levy tax plus account 456. And I do want to note that though the district administration is receiving this amount, the district administration functions to support all the departments. So salaries, it would be difficult to allocate a portion of salaries to different departments from that, because the whole job of district administration is to support the entire department, the entire district. I'm going to now move on to page 6.
Catherine, can I just ask a question? I'm sorry.
Sure.
When you're over the allocations, I want to you took police was 63% of the general levy plus which accounts?
Plus accounts 402 through 418.
And then park was 6% plus accounts.
Park is 6% of the plus accounts 424 and 427.
Okay, that's all. I got the rest. Thank you.
Okay, great. So moving into to page 6, actually just need to get my, page 6 is the budget summary. And this shows that, so police activities will have a projected income of about $2.672 million and expenses at 2.647. So the surplus for police activities would be roughly $25,000. Parks and Rec would have a $177,000 projected income and $158,000 in projected expenses with a $19,000 surplus. And I do want to say that's very conservative for Parks and Rec. There are some things coming up like tree removal, and that is budgeted, but it could go, there could be changes and it could be a little bit higher. So the 19,000 surplus for Parks and Rec is conservative. District administration is a 632,000 for income and projected expenses at 614. And district administration would have about an $18,000 surplus if we are all able to. And so the total surplus would be around $74,000 for the year. So this is a pretty tight budget year. And if you go on to page 7, I have a revenue fund revenue by source. Somehow I noticed this evening that this percentages didn't show up. So I'm going to just tell them to you guys right now. The levy tax is 57%. The franchise fees gross is 2% of the total budget. The special tax landscape and lighting district is 1%. Other revenue is 4%. Measure G, supplemental police tax is 17%. And the special police tax is 19%. So I will correct that on the final document also. For the general fund expenditures by activity, page 8 pie chart, we see the police are about 76% of our total expenses. Parks and Rec are 5%. General administration is 18%. And capital purchases are at 1%. And just to note, that capital purchase number does not have the police car lease in it. The police car lease falls under, and I'll get more into that when we get into the police car budget, but since it would be a municipal government lease, they're in the expenses, and once we own them, we'll move them to our capital purchases. Now I am moving on to page 9. This is just a revenue and expense summary. I'm going to go into more detail once I go by department. So I think I'll just start with the revenue and talk about that. And then for the expenditures, I'm going to talk about that in detail by department. So the revenue, I'd say the 401 levy tax is our largest source of revenue. And right now we're budgeting conservatively at 3.5% increase from last year. We've had a few people, and we hope also, we have a few finance committee members that believe it would be more, and we do hope that it would be closer to 4.1%. So that could make a, $60,000 or $70,000 difference in that number, in the positive. So that would be good. And another number that's very conservative, we hope, is the 415 police grants number. We budgeted 100,000, but it normally comes in closer to 155,000. I think the rest of them are probably pretty spot on as far as income is concerned. And as I said, as for expenditures, we're going to review that once we get to each department. On page 10, again, a spelling error, general. And if anyone has any other errors that I've made throughout this document, please note them or let me know. But this, the general fund revenue detail, so this basically just lists all of the same information on the previous page, but it's just for income.
I did notice another error in number 414. It should be reimbursement.
Okay, thank you.
We tend to have a problem spelling that word in district.
All right, so to move on to page 12 for the police department, I'm just going to go over the key accomplishments and the goals. Unless you would like to do that, Walt, I plan to do it. So, well,
I'll be happy.
I don't mind doing it. I had planned to do it. So.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So the key accomplishments in this fiscal year in 1920 were improved technology with body-worn cameras, updated office computers and radios, and installed axon signals in vehicles, improved community engagement through increased social media presence, recess with the cops, read America, chat with the chief, and held numerous meetings with residents in groups and individually. Conducted formal reviews of training and quality of police reports and investigations, improved payroll processes, digitized files, and created a daily schedule system, updated post-recruiting website, completed all pending internal affairs investigations, designed a traffic safety officer and updated a traffic manual, recruited intern police, Chief Scholl to replace outgoing Chief Simpkins. And the Kensington continues to be a safe community with consistently low violent and property crime. Their major goals in the 2021 year are to professionalize the police department infrastructure, continue to engage the community and concerned groups through programs, social media, meetings, and establishing a yearly Citizens Academy. Update and replace the dilapidated vehicle fleet, update the policy manual, update field training program, explore outsourcing contracts for major crimes and internal affairs investigations, continue proactive policing and traffic safety, improve record management and information systems, i.e. sex registration process, evidence management, CalPhoto, and the automated response information exchange system. Explain and complete application process to use the state criminal law enforcement telecommunication system, prioritize recruitment of officers and next chief of police, continue to assist the design and removal of existing police department.
I think you meant remodel.
Remodel, yes, you're right. Establish a volunteer and cadet program, and work with the El Cerrito Fire District to collectively update the emergency evacuation route. So a lot of goals for the police.
If we have questions, is this the time to ask, or should we wait till we get through the whole thing and then talk to Chief Schultz?
Why don't we do it by department? So if I get through I can continue with the budget, and then at the end of the police department's budget, then you guys can ask questions. I think that would probably make the most sense.
Thank you.
For the page 14, police department expenditures, salaries, and benefits. This is based on a 10-person police force, though we budgeted using a number 9.5, and that is because there are these frictional vacancies. We probably would never get to that point of having 10, and if we do, you have some that leave and some that come throughout the year. So that's why we use that number. I think it's pretty conservative. That is what the salaries represent. Our salaries for 502 are just over $1 million. And that's just base compensation. And compensated absences are for when people leave and we have to pay out their remaining vacation balances or comp time balances to them. Overtime is, it is what it is. We're hoping it will be less, but with different events that come up with COVID and with, anything else in the world that comes up. I know recently there was more overtime because of the protests. There's things that are out of their hands that they can't control and that need coverage. The salaries non-sworn, that's for the police services aid. So the total salaries are at a little over 1.2 million. The uniform allowance is, this is all basically what was negotiated in the MOU. The only difference on all of the benefit accounts, the 424 Social Security account, or Social Security account for the district we're deleting that from the police department and just moving it to the 809 account, which is where we're keeping track of all the taxes for the administrative department. And the 529 account is, instead of UAL amortization, we're going to call it the pension obligation bond payment. And that is the right number for that. The other difference is the police department used to have all of the workers' comp in. They used to take on the full workers' comp for the entire district. Now that's being allocated evenly across districts by percentage of employees in those departments. So the total benefits for the police are a little over $1,004,196. And the total police salaries and benefits are at 2.2 million. So if we go to page 15, it describes in more detail the other police expenditures. Again, the new accounts are the traffic safety account, and that they're all highlighted in kind of a light yellow. So the traffic safety 554, the 561, the 563 vehicle lease, and the vehicle fuel. The big reason to split that out is to just really see what we're spending on fuel. We're going to go to a hybrid police car model. So hopefully we're going to be seeing at least a 30 to maybe 35% savings in fuel costs. But that will be a good number to track over the next few years and see what that goes down to. And the vehicle lease, that is a pretty conservative number for 4 police hybrid SUV Interceptor models. think, hybrid interceptor SUV, and then one detective car.
You're saying that vehicle fuel was never broken out before?
It was included in vehicle maintenance. So everything, I think 561, 62, and 63 were all included in one account.
Okay, thank you.
Instead of looking at them separately. And it's just a matter of presentation and what you want to see. But I think it's nice to be able to look at fuel separately, since, you know, especially if we're going to a model of a car that should be saving fuel costs.
We just can't compare it to previous years. That's okay.
We can if we break it out, you know, manually.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's okay.
And the communications is lower because we took out the telephone expense, the telephone line for AT&T was in that. And so instead the 564 is only the contracts that we have with outside companies for communications. It's not like, so that is now in the 588 account. So 588 went up and that went down. I think alarm is a new account. It was always within the prisoner booking storage account before. So just alarm and storage and records. I think all of those actually were all into one account before, and post reimbursement. So that 578 is now separate. I think, as I said before, the IT contract 587, we have separated that out to include it in the police department's budget rather than all in district administration. General liability is being split across, and it's 40% for the police department. So they are taking on the 40% of the general liability insurance. And that did go up this year due to all the fires and a few other, I think, small things. But the fires were the biggest reason that general liability went up across the board. 593 is a new account that former Chief Simpkins added for volunteer programs. So I think that is the police budget, and they come in at a total of about $432,000. So I guess now I will open it up for questions for the police department.
Sylvia, I think you had some questions already, right?
Yes, let's start with some simple things. I just want to flag for you all, the crossing guard issue. I don't know whether the we don't have 2019, 2020 actuals yet, but that may be lower because the school ended, early. And we don't know what the plans are yet for going back. So that's just something to keep an eye on. To keep track of what the WCCUSD is going to do for schools. You're certainly welcome to talk to me or Rachel if you want to know. But I think, if we don't remember to tell you, you should keep track of that. Because that may provide some savings, actually, if they don't go to school right away. Not that I wish that. I have some questions for Chief Schold around, just want to flag for you something that Chief Simpkins and I talked about, which was the purchase of some trail cams. And if you haven't yet spoken to him about that, you might want to add that to a list of things to do, but it was something that he thought the district would be ready to do. He had borrowed some from Danville and thought that he had some good ideas about where to deploy those. I guess I'd like to hear more about the fleet. It sounds like we're planning on replacing the entire fleet. Is that correct?
No, we're going to replace 4 of the patrol cars and 1 detective vehicle. The admin car is fine. And I'm going to transfer one of the older patrol vehicles into what they call training vehicle. And they can also use it as an emergency patrol vehicle.
So that'll be 7.
5 cars altogether. We have a fleet of 7.
Right, a total of 7. Do you have the room for all of those?
Yes.
Is that anything additional? I mean, you're keeping an old patrol car for training. Does that make it? Do we go up? Do we go up a vehicle because of that in our total fleet?
No.
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 Okay. I know you're still early in your tenure, but you know, I continue to remain concerned about costs, and some of the things we're talking about here are, and I'd like to know more about them. I mean, I hope that, you know, the outsourcing of major crimes and internal affairs is something that will be prioritized because it's important. And it was part of the, I think, recommendations that came partially out of the Matrix report. And again, it may help us have a steady hand and make some sense. Clearly, you know, it makes sense to do for us. And perhaps there's some cost savings in that. I don't know. Do you anticipate that those would be cost savings measures or not so much?
The outsourcing for the major crimes and internal affairs, those two things are going to be used very rarely. We should be able to do internal affairs investigations for minor incidents that occur here. What we want to outsource on internal affairs is only when it would be, I would have to do the investigation because there's nobody of more rank to do that investigation. If I were to do that investigation, then I would not be able to decide on the discipline because I would be doing the investigation and I would have to outsource my decision, which is not what a chief wants to do. And as far as major crimes, that would be rare instances where if there is a complicated murder, kidnapping, sexual assault that will take a lot of man hours to do, and the Kensington Police doesn't have that, that would be a decision that we would use that. We haven't needed that in quite a few years, but it's always nice to have that because we may have one of those incidents that happens once every 10 years, but we have a system in place where we can do a competent investigation. Not that we would be out of the investigation. Our detective and maybe another officer would participate in that investigation, but we would have more resources and then also take care of the streets. But like I said, those two items would probably rarely be used.
So the idea is to put an agreement in place proactively so that you could trigger it if you needed it.
Correct.
Okay. And would you anticipate that would be with the same agency?
Yes, I would like it with the same agency. I'm inquiring with the Sheriff's Department and waiting for a response from them. And then if they cannot do it or it's not cost effective, then I'll see about the District Attorney's Office. They have a lot of competent investigators that work for the Attorney's Office also.
Okay, thank you.
Might I add a bit of historical context?
I'm not finished yet, please. So again, you know, I think we really have shown that we would like to invest in, you know, the force. We've provided an upgrade on salaries to be competitive with the market. We've invested in technology. We're looking at now investing in vehicles. We've invested in body-worn cameras, all things that were recommended as, you know, best practices. And yet one of our biggest expenses and one that's really hard to control, because I feel like we manage on a year-to-year basis to support the department, but it continues to be the pension liabilities and the benefits and unfunded things. And so we get into, you know, the numbers of personnel. And when we had multiple meetings around community policing and the desires of the community, clearly a high touch, you know, police department was wanted, but many of the calls that we get and many of the things that people highlighted were not things you necessarily need a sworn officer for. And so, you know, one thing we haven't talked about yet and explored are community service officers, which seem to be ideal for our community. And, you know, potentially, you know, if we eliminated one officer and added 2 part-time CSOs, for example, to do those kinds of things, again, not to reduce the services we provide, but actually to kind of try and realign the, you know, the needs and the desires of the community with our ability to continue to bear these costs, especially the growing, you know, the unfunded liability issue, which never really goes away no matter what we do. I want you to talk a little bit about the community service officers, if you know kind of their costs, but also, is that something you're willing to look into?
Well, CSOs or community service officers, usually they're relegated to working the front counter, parking enforcement, processing reports, doing clerical work, and maybe doing some ordering of equipment.
So they're not out in the community?
They can be, but usually people want to see a sworn officer when they go to a neighborhood watch, somebody that's familiar with crime fighting and what to do in certain circumstances. And I guess you could train a CSO, but you're still not going to have that level of service you can with a sworn officer. CSOs are very efficient in busy departments because they can take reports and take that the burden off the officer that's going from call to call. But Kensington doesn't have that problem. And if you take a sworn officer, you're gonna have unintended consequences of increased overtime because you got to cover their shifts with sick time, vacation, training, and all that. So you're gonna actually probably lose money in the long run because you can only do so much with the CSO. And if Kensington was a real busy department, I would say yes, CSOs would be cost effective. You would save money on that officer. But I think if you take an officer away and you put 2 CSOs, you're probably going to be at bottom step officer anyways, and paying a little bit more, that officer can do a lot more for the community than a CSO could.
I think I had a very different understanding of what a CSO was, I guess.
Yeah, they really can't do any kind of enforcement other than parking. They can't pull over cars. They're not around to do security checks or anything like that.
We talked a lot about with Chief Simpkins that there's law enforcement, there's community service, and that there's a lot of community service here in Kensington. So that's why I thought this was a potential opportunity.
Well, I think our volunteer program and our cadet program will take care of that. And we're really anxious to get that going, but we've been stymied by the virus, of course. But a volunteer program, we've already gotten a couple applications for a volunteer program. They can do everything a CSO can do, and they're happy to do it. And they can file, they can, like, for example, our evacuation plan, we got to do a lot of going door to door. We got to do block parties to get people educated on the new evacuation plan. The volunteers can do all that. CSO, for Kensington, I don't think it's cost effective. For a busy department, it would be.
Okay. All right, I was thinking about, we heard stories about, someone had dumped a mattress in front of my driveway, or, I needed help putting up a bird feeder, and I'm not exaggerating. These were stories we heard. And so I thought a community service officer could do things with, with community members, could do well checks, actually, if someone said, I haven't heard from somebody in a while. I understand the difference between law enforcement, obviously, but.
Yeah, the community service officers wouldn't help somebody with a mattress or anything. They would probably call Public Works or something like that normally. And if they haven't heard somebody for a while, they would call a police officer, because the CSO wouldn't know what to do if nobody answers the door. There's a lot of things a police officer can do and do checks to find out relatives and all that, where a community service officer just wouldn't be able to do that.
All right, I appreciate that explanation, because it was not, I guess, we hear the term and maybe we didn't understand what it meant.
Okay.
And are there any other ways you anticipate that there might be unanticipated savings, or I don't know, anything from operational efficiencies? I feel like, both you and Chief Simpkins have come in with a vast amount of experience and are looking to make, really, I appreciate all the improvements that are happening already. I just wonder if you had any other thoughts about things that might, end up providing some efficiencies.
As far as cost savings?
Yeah.
Overall, the board has improved the department with all the technology. costs a lot, but it's going to save you money in the long run with lawsuits and personnel matters. And also, you know, with the equipment, with the vehicles, you're going to save on gas. First, I mean, it's a lease program, which Catherine did a great job in finding this program because it's very cost effective than buying them outright, which would cost a lot of money. So you're going to save in maintenance costs. You're going to save money in gas. As far as saving money in other areas, I think we can save money in overtime if we can keep our staffing level at at the minimum. I think overtime costs is a lot, and we should be able to reduce that.
And then just one last question about improving records management information systems. And you listed a bunch of different things here. Are those things that are required that we haven't been sort of performing up to par at the moment, or are these things you want to add? You mentioned the sex offender registration process and evidence management, CalPhoto, all these things.
Yeah, well, some of those are required by law and they weren't up to date. Detective Nath has done a great job already. He's updated all the forms on the sex registration process. He's found some mistakes in that. The CalPhoto is a excellent investigative tool, and just the clutch system. Every police department should have a clutch system, and that's where you run people for criminal.
We know a lot about that here.
Well, it's every police department should have a up and running clutch. So it's amazing that I found that we didn't have one. So I'm hoping by the time I leave that one's going to be up. But it's a very complicated issue now. It's a very complicated application process to get that. So we're working on that. And then also Detective Nath has got our live scan up. So we just got to go through a couple more requirements and training, and we're going to have our live scan back up, and that hasn't been up for years. And then we have these devices in our cars that apparently we've been paying for through the county under the Cal ID program, where you can verify somebody's identification through a fingerprint. It takes a matter of seconds, and it's all mobile in the car. So Detective Nath has also gotten that going. So everything's in the department is starting to improve, and we're getting, for lack of a better term, we're getting modernized. And you're going to see a lot of efficiency, and you're going to see the cost benefit later on.
Walt, I believe that Albany, the department has always relied on some other agency for the CLETS. When dispatch was with Richmond, they used Richmond. With dispatch with Albany, my understanding is that the police are relying on Albany dispatch. And the reason for that is that you can call Albany dispatch on your radio. Cell connection for the mobile computers in the car is very iffy in the hills. And because of the time constraints and with one officer on duty at night, you may not be able to leave a call that you're on. And that's the reason why the department has relied on whoever provides dispatch for the department.
Yeah, that's not exactly true. We've relied on it because we didn't do the CLUTS application, and we didn't follow through with connecting. All departments have their own CLUTS. They don't rely on the if they, like for San Pablo, we dispatch with Richmond. We had our own CLUTS because our detectives had to do the work, and they can't go over to Richmond and say, go run these crooks out for us so we can investigate the crime. It just takes a lot of time for somebody else to do that kind of investigative work. If detectives get called out in the middle of the night, they don't want to rely on another agency to do all their investigative work. It's something that is usually done in-house. If we have a missing person, it's usually we enter the missing person. We don't go over to a different agency and enter that missing person. So every agency should be able to do this by themselves.
Cyrus, did you?
Oh, I explained that Right.
I'm sorry, I was just going to add one other thing that I know that you guys have been working on, just researching grant possibilities. You know, I don't think anything is set in stone for grants right now, but there are some grants out there, and possibly there might be some more grants throughout the year. So there might be opportunity for more income for the police department through grants. And there is a possibility that the U.S., the government that might appropriate money for coronavirus for special districts. Right now, they're excluding special districts.
Yeah, Catherine, thank you for reminding me. That's another thing that we've been looking into is grants for the department. There's a lot of grants out there, and I don't think I think Kensington should take advantage of those the grant process. We're also improving the way we do traffic investigations. They haven't been reported to the state properly. It's going to take a couple years, but once we report our traffic accidents correctly to the state, then we can apply for grants for high accident intersections to get grant money to improve those intersections, DUI enforcement, whatever. But there's a lot of grants out there. But that's another thing on the traffic enforcement side is that Detective Harms is a traffic expert, and he's improved all the forms. We're going to get a program that allows us to track everything and then keep updated with the state. And then eventually, as our stats are counted, we'll be able to get traffic grants as well.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, I have one other question, which is, I think it's great that you're looking into hybrid cars, but have you evaluated what the increase in electricity will be versus the savings on gas? And I don't believe there's any plan to put solar panels anywhere. So where are these cars going to be recharged?
I don't believe they're plug-in. They're just hybrid.
Yeah, they're not plug-in.
Okay.
And the cost savings from, this wasn't an analysis that we did specifically for Kensington. It was for the City of Oakland Police Fleet. But it was $2,800 per year per car.
Yeah. Great work, Catherine.
Oh, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Walt, I have a question for you, or at least a comment. The outsourcing major crimes and internal affairs, I've spoken with Chief Simpkins, and I think he's mentioned in other places, the possibility of outsourcing evidence, and especially if we do go anywhere near this, sort of the design that they're thinking of where the police are on the ground floor and the fire on the upper floor. There was a small area carved out by Chief Simpkins for evidence, but it was small, or it was tiny really, just something to put little things in when it's needed. But he was talking about at least contracting for larger evidence and going to a place that has, you know, really extensive record keeping and chain of custody control and all that. So you might, you know, this is obviously just a aspirational document, but I think we should at least mention that that was also a possibility that was raised.
Yeah, I'll look into that.
Okay.
All
right, Catherine.
I wanted to.
Oh, go ahead.
So about IAs, we actually do for certain fractions of IAs, we already contract out. That's found in 595 already. So it's not, that's not a novel thing. It's already being done by the department.
I just disagree with contracting out with a private investigative firm. I find them off a lot of times very expensive, and they do a lot of fluff work that is not needed in an internal affairs investigation. So I'm looking, when I say contract out to internal affairs, I'm talking about another police agency.
Oh yeah, we've also done that. I think for certain cases, we have actually sent IAs out. So yeah, I agree. You don't want to do the fluff type things, but we also, it's not new for this department to farm out very important IAs to another police department.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's, you know, yeah. And then I guess my one question about the budget when I was going through it was like, So the reduction in 595, that's assuming that we're going to, because I understand I went back and looked at the historical amounts, and that's more in line with what we used to spend in that category. That was like, I think 07, 08, it was about 35,000. So it's just trying to, I'm assuming that's trying to bring that back down to the pre-levels, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And I believe the thought was, you know, we're pretty much done negotiating that. We are done negotiating the MOU. So a lot of the costs last year were for the MOU negotiations. So this year we don't have that, and we hopefully don't foresee any other major costs for that expense. So.
Okay, I just wanted to, yeah. I mean, and I'm kind of happy we're now finally getting around to the police cars, because that has been kind of getting a bit not okay with the state of the fleet. So I'm kind of happy to see that line item actually seriously put in.
Catherine, then go on.
Okay. Okay, so if we go to page 6.
Public comments for each section, or is that at the end?
This is at the end, because this is just sort of an explanation and the staff explaining things. Then we go to public comments.
Okay, so page 16, this will be updated by our general manager, Bill Lindsay, and page 17, that's just, or page 16 is just the narrative for the Parks and Rec, and what we foresee as expenses and needs this coming year. I think the biggest things that on page 17, the largest expenses that we have for the Parks and Rec, we have the general maintenance, and that includes the tree removal, which could be as low as 26,000 and as high as 45,000. It could even go higher if there are other trees that have since died or aren't in good shape. So they're probably going to have to get reevaluated. We had, with Eileen's help, we had 3 different people give us bids, but we haven't done that work yet. So, and that was a few months ago, I think that it was right when I started the district. So I believe in December that happened. So, so that number is included. There possibly could be increased costs for the maintenance of the grounds, as far as I'm just going to start from the beginning on this one. I kind of started in the middle. So
Catherine,
yeah.
We should probably just extend the meeting because they're getting kind of close.
Okay.
Do I have a motion to extend the meeting?
I'll make a motion.
Go ahead.
I move that we extend the meeting until, would you say 11 is good?
Yeah.
Okay, I move we extend the meeting until 11. Hopefully we won't need it all.
I'll second that. Cyrus?
Aye.
Rochelle? Let's get you on. There you go. Rochelle? Go ahead.
Yes.
Sylvia? You have to unmute yourself, Sylvia.
Yes.
Eileen?
Yes.
I vote yes. All right. 5-0, we extend the meeting to 11. Great. Sorry, Catherine.
That's okay. I can start over on this section. So as far as if we're looking at this from a larger perspective, we changed this budget to split the 3 kind of sections up. So we split it up into the community center expenses, park expenses, and kind of other park and recreation expenses, which include the annex, some small amount of gardening around the annex. The Kensington Park O&M, that was where all the previous expenses would get lumped kind of. So that's where these have all kind of been expanded now throughout these categories. And then the tennis court maintenance expense. And we are looking to have that resurfaced hopefully in July. so basically the salaries include our Parks and Rec administrator, and then also the custodian. The custodian's not actually, he's a independent contractor right now. So that's why it's kind of a separate line item, because it doesn't get, he doesn't pay tax. We don't pay taxes on his, he pays his own taxes since he's an independent contractor. If we look at the community center, the general maintenance, we're looking at about $1,000. The utilities, that's a historical number, 6131. Janitorial supplies is just we're guessing on that one, since this is new, that we'll just be renting it out. And also, I'd say we don't really know, because of COVID. We don't know how much we're going to actually be able to rent the community center out or use it, you know, in the next 3 to 6 months. So that will affect these numbers. They will probably go down some, because we won't have as many expenses for the community center if we're not able to use it. Landscaping is being split. This is 30% of our total landscaping budget, which is $25,000. That's across all these, so $25,000 is the total amount for landscaping, and 30% goes to the community center, 50% goes to the park, and 20% goes to the annex landscaping. And that's just kind of the area all around the annex. So the community center expenses could go down, but the income would also go down with it. So it would hopefully be 1 for 1. But maybe we would have more expenses and still not have enough income, depending on how long the shelter in place and the social distancing and small gatherings continues. Sorry if you hear fireworks. We're having a fireworks problem in our neighborhood.
Everywhere.
Yes. So for the Parks Department, the Parks section now, we have the general maintenance includes all the tree removal and any other general maintenance. We have repairs at 5,000. Landscaping is the 50% of 25,000. Janitorial supplies should be fairly low for the park. Rental 500. We're hoping to rent out the park for gatherings. We've planned to do that, so that would probably be more likely with this, you know, outside gatherings allowed. So hopefully that will happen, you know, for birthday parties or other events outside. Utilities is all the East Bay Mud water bill. And I believe in the summer it gets a lot higher. General liability is split across this department. The levy administration is mandatory. So we pay NBS to manage our levy for us, and that administration and all the what we just recently did at the last board meeting. And miscellaneous expenses should be quite low. And then if we look at the other parks and recreation expenses, these annex general maintenance and annex repairs and annex landscaping, the annex general or repairs, you know, if at the mid-year budget review, I believe we do want to do a review of this entire budget, and that would be one of the things to look at. But that would probably then go into capital improvements for the annex if that happens. Miscellaneous projects, where it was brought to our for community projects, and the tennis court maintenance would be about 16,000 to resurface the tennis courts. So we're looking at our total Parks and Rec expenses at 158,000, with a surplus, as I said, at about 19,000. So it's a tight budget for Parks and Rec also.
Can you explain the custodian amount is the 29-20 budget column is much lower than previous years, and then the 2020-21 budget is also fairly low.
You know, I will have to go back and look at the 2018-19. I don't know why. Yeah, I can't answer that question off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I can go back and find out for you.
Thank you.
But this is for William Driscoll's, you know, cleaning of the parks, yeah, and garbage removal or disposal.
Right.
Cyrus?
So I guess my first question was, has anyone, I'll lower my hand first, has anyone sort of gone back and analyzed how much more the lighting district tax needs to be boosted? Because I remember the history of the park was when they made that district tax, it was supposed to be self-contained and maintain the park on its own. And it was not supposed to draw so much from the general fund, which was allocated already for the police and for the solid waste.
Well, the general fund is the general fund, right? I mean, it's.
But I mean, it was part of the promise when people were talking about how they were going to purchase the park, it would not create a massive additional cost center on the district. That the lighting tax would help, would actually make that mostly cost neutral. You know, it's like, this goes back to some of the older minutes way back.
Yeah, actually, through the chair, Director Madavi, that was something that was in the staff report for the landscaping lighting district approval 2 weeks ago. Yeah. And I can go back and look it up real quick. It's really not that much money. And I think it's maybe something that the board takes a look at that could be implemented this, not for the current fiscal year. It's too late for that, but that would be for budget year 21-22. And it would probably be on the order to have it on a completely break-even basis. It would probably be another $10 per residential equivalent, something like that. It wouldn't be very much.
But that wouldn't last forever, and we'd have the same issues. And I think that many people would argue that the park is as much a part of our responsibility as anything else. And I mean, at this point, $10,000 from the general fund should not be a make or break thing. It's part of the responsibilities of this district.
No, I understand. It's really just a policy decision for the board to wrestle with. It's something you may want to look at, or you're right. You know, that's what your general fund is for, is to spend it the way you want to and allocate it the way you want to.
Okay, no, so that report back then took into everything that happened during the budgeting process too. Like that reflects these reality in the current budget.
It reflects that. It reflects what you approved on the landscaping lighting district several weeks ago. Is that your question? I mean,
well, I guess I mean, like, given that we've now had the budget in a far more complete form, that analysis reflects the current budget predictions.
Yeah, the staff report.
Yes. Yeah, okay, that was, I guess that was the primary question. And just one thing about the annex, I remember the Measure L folks, regardless of what wants to think of Measure L, had done some cost estimates about the annex, and some of their cost estimates were a lot pricier than $1,000. I think some of them were in the order, I think it was tens of thousands of dollars actually. And those
I think this was not, sorry to I don't want to interrupt, but I don't think the intent of the $1,000 was for major capital improvements. That's just for, you know, really, I think that's for pest management.
Okay, just like,
so
it would still be in the same shape except the cockroaches scurried out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or if there was some, you know, major water leak that had to get attended to right away, you know, that's not for, I think general maintenance was for the pest, and annex repairs was for just auxiliary things that could happen throughout the year. You know, like if there was water intrusion or a window was broken, or, you know, that kind of, those kind of unexpected expenses. But capital improvements.
It's not like repairs the whole extent, just maintaining current status quo. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Michelle?
Oh, just a couple clarifications. I think that the reason 602 may be so cheap is part of the fact, or inexpensive, that in March, we stopped cleaning and using the bathrooms. So that was, I believe, $475 or $425 a month.
But this
So
this is budget, not actual, and that's why I'm asking.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Okay. But we also anticipated much less use because
that's true.
The community center.
That may be right, Catherine. That that my number is low because we knew the community center was going to be closed for much of the year, aside from COVID, because of the community.
That's probably what it was, and so he wouldn't be cleaning regularly. So maybe
correct.
This okay. But then our new thought process is that when there are events, all events should be charged a certain amount to be able to make up for his fees. So whatever we're paying him, it should, there shouldn't be very many things that he's doing outside of that. It's evening itself out, So we might have to reassess that number though. So I will look into that.
Good memory, Rachel. I mean, that was good that we've remembered that.
In terms of Director Mondavi's remark about the assessment, I've heard from folks that when they passed the park assessment, they really didn't include funded maintenance in that.
Yeah, it was underfunded.
It was way underfunded. So they wanted it to pass. I understand amicably. They wanted it to get the land, and unfortunately just inflation and things. So that has not kept up. And the Mueller-Caulfield report that you were referring to about renovation for the annex, at that time it was estimated at $1.4 million to renovate the annex. I in no way anticipate that Mueller-Caulfield also wanted to renovate the community center for $1 million more than over $1 million more than we spent 5 years later, 10 years later. No.
I thought the Measure L was $2 million for both the community center and annex. It was both.
They were they were priced separately.
But I mean, the total came out to around $2 million. That was the whole point of the bond, was complete.
No, it was $2.8 million was what they were going to spend on the community center itself. The 1.4 was for the annex itself. They were separate. And no annex work was going to be done because the board at that time deemed it too expensive.
The community center was 2.2, and then the annex, I have the summary sheets because I actually had gotten the old Caulfield reports.
I know, but ultimately they would have wanted to spend 2.8.
Oh, and the community center was 1.8. Temporary annex improvements was $75K, furnishing and equipment $150K, total construction contingency $200K, total $2.2 for everything.
Okay, well, no, but we'll agree to disagree and move forward. So
public document.
Yeah, I've read them too.
Anything else, Rochelle?
No, thank you very much.
All right, let's move on, Catherine.
Okay. So we will move on now to district administration. I'm going to go over the accomplishments of this year and our goals. So this year, this wasn't my doing, but they hired my 3 new part-time administrative staff, including the clerk of the board, a finance and business manager, and administrative assistant. Implemented a schedule to hold weekly staff meetings to coordinate and check in with all department heads, including the chief of police, general manager, finance and business manager, parks administrator, clerk of the board, and administrative assistant. Created a file structure and database on the computer for all the district data to be saved and backed up to create redundancy. This also allowed for remote work right away. There was never any problems when we had to go remote. Digitize the current year and continue to work to digitize as much historical data as possible. Set up technology so administrative staff have the ability to work remotely. In partnership with the police department, completed an implementation of a new payroll system and timekeeping process for the police department and administrative staff. Completion of a new accounts payable transmittal process to create more transparency for the board of directors to see all transactions that go through the district each AP run, and to help with the data organization for the annual audit and to create more redundancy. Plan to, and all of these are also saved on our everything's backed up with Rubicon. So even if a district employee was to delete all files, Rubicon has a complete backup of everything. So all files could never be deleted. Once they're on the district administration drive, they're saved forever. Plan to scale back on consulting services. Completion of steps to obtain the maximum points that earn the district. This is for our insurance with SDRMA. We have to complete steps, the board of directors, the employees. We have to do different types of education and policies. And this year we were able to save 13,000. So we basically got the maximum, except for one prior lawsuit that put us a little bit under the maximum, but it only cost, I think, cost the district $300. We identified the need for an outside accounting firm to know and understand all our accounting processes and procedures, to do our monthly bank reconciliations, and to provide a level of assurance to the district when we report our numbers to the public. This is to ensure good internal controls in such a small office and create a level of redundancy and segregation of duties. We're just now completing the annual audit. Our major goals for 2021 are to work collaboratively across all departments to increase morale, a team environment, and work efficiencies. Digitize the contract signature process, which we actually just completed due to COVID. We needed to have signatures digitized. So we've been using DocuSign now. And that has really helped with people being able to sign documents much more in a much more efficient and timely manner. Continue to work with community members to address the needs of the public. Continue to have, this needs to be removed because I believe this was taken off. Build a meaningful budget that holds each department accountable to work within their budgets. Continue to improve upon the public's records request process with the goals of timely responses and lessening legal and consulting fees related to these requests. Also implementing a tracking system so we can report to the public the amount of time and money that is needed to respond to these requests. Create a comprehensive salary schedule for all district employees with clear pay grades. Create an internal human resource manual that includes standard operating procedures for handling all HR related issues, including but not limited to an onboarding platform process, employee review system, proper training, clear job descriptions, create an accounting and finance manual, create an injury, illness, and prevention plan, evaluate the current accounting system, which is QuickBooks, and possibly make a recommendation to whether the district should stay with QuickBooks or go to a true fund accounting software system that could also be cloud-based, such as AccuFund, Intact, or others to be researched. Oversee the completion of the annual audit for the year. So now I'm going to go into the district administration expenditures. Our payroll expenses basically include myself, Bill, the general manager, the clerk of the board, and the administrative assistant, and a 10-hour-a-week accounting specialist that we don't have. That's in the authorizing staff, but that would be the only change or the only difference to this last year. And that would reduce my hours to closer to the 20 hours that I was hired at, because I'm closer to 30 hours most of the time. So you would be paying me, you would be paying an accounting specialist less to do some of the work that I'm doing. Account number 810 went down significantly because we're sharing those costs now with the, well, we're allocating the costs to the police department and to administration. admin communications. I believe that was a new title that you guys added a few years ago. And it's staying about the same for costs. For the pretty much 816, 817, 818, 819, 825, 826, and 861, those also all used to be in the 898 account. So they've just been split out. So now we have office supplies, postage, that's a mileage. That would be for like mileage reimbursement. If employees go somewhere on behalf of the district, they can choose to be reimbursed. We don't see it very often, but it does happen. Dues and subscriptions, board continuing education conference, that could possibly be lower depending if people can actually go to conferences this year or not. They might be Zoom conferences, so travel might be a savings, but that's what it was last year. So we're continuing to keep that in there. Board meetings, this cost actually includes all of the, I think, the Zoom charges for the year. If Zoom goes away and we're able to have in-person meetings, then this could go down possibly by half. And it used to include the expense of the church when you rented the church out for the board meetings. We're hoping to decrease legal from the actual in 1819 to keep it at the 85,000 for this year. Consulting, I'd say 30,000 is pretty conservative. I think that number could include a possible look at the consulting for the solid waste contract, possibly. The accounting, 840, that includes the annual audit and the contract with Mays. Workers' compensation is allocated by the percentage of employees here, and LAFCO is what the actual would be. The police building lease has always been in our department, which is, I think, is fine. It's here nor there, but if you, there has been talk that it could be moved to the police department's expense. And then, you know, we probably would have to do a little reallocation of the general levy across the departments if that was to happen. So I think overall we have a total, for 898, we did budget a little bit higher for this account to give a little bit of wiggle room for anything that we didn't account for. And I know that I've heard people talking, and this could include remote working expenses that we don't have in this current budget. So depending on how long COVID lasts and how much is decided upon for, you know, a stipend, that 898 could possibly include that. So for our total administration expenses, we have just about $310,000 for expenses. So that's district administration. Do you guys have any questions?
You say that you're decreasing your hours, but at least on page, I think it's 25, it says it's going from 0.3 to 0.5.
In the previous years, they allocated that position across 2 different departments. So it was always at 0.5. Last year it was budgeted at 0.5. It was just allocated across, Parks and Rec and district administration. That's not to say that I'm not doing work for the park department and the police department. It's just, it's easier for all district administration to just be in district administration.
And so then the police services aide is going to take on more of the hybrid role again? At least I'm just looking at how the budget has been shifted.
The police services aide, I believe, is going to stay in the police, now is going to be fully in the police department's budget.
Well, I don't know, because here it's still parks administrator is a quarter time, and then a half time for policing.
I think we just forgot to take out the police service aid line. So I just need to remove that line. So it's parks administrator 0.25 and administrative assistant 0.25. So the administrative assistant is going to help take on some of the parks administrator duties.
Okay. And so the overall fiscal impact of the accounting specialist is minimal or is like neutral?
It is minimal, that is correct. It probably will see savings because if I'm working 10 hours less and I'm paying somebody $32 an hour versus $62 an hour, then you'd see a $30 an hour savings for 10 hours a week. So that would be $300 a week savings approximately. So in a month, you could see about $1,200 of savings.
If I may, I think there was also perhaps using Maze a little bit less also, a little bit less consulting time.
Where have I heard that before? So I'm always hopeful, but account 835 and account 830, everyone's been saying that for years. And
I'll share your hopefulness.
Yeah. And so I guess
they have gone down.
Not really when you combine all consultants together. We've been through this. I've plotted this. It's not been pretty.
Can someone point out, or can you, Cyrus, say where you're seeing all these different things about percentage of time in different positions?
I think that is, let me just double check.
That is on the staff, the authorizing staff page, 25.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
And so we're also removing the corporal position.
That was removed before. It was authorized last year, but we haven't had a corporal since Corporal Stegman left in what Anne would know what year that was. 2018, 2018.
Okay, I guess the point is we're removing the authorization for a corporal.
I actually don't remember. I'm sorry.
That's right.
So we can just go to page 25 right now, since we're talking about it.
It's easier for me to think about costs that way through the FTEs.
So, so basically, we have one police chief. We have who doesn't get any benefits, because he's a retired annuitant. We have one police captain. We have 2 sergeants and 6 police officers, and then 0.5 of a halftime for the police services aide. And then for the Parks and Rec, that's the 0.25 and 0.25. So that is the same. The Parks and Rec is the administrative assistant. So I have to also put that there to make it clear. So that makes that a halftime position also. The general manager is at 0.46, which is the 960 CalPERS limit for the retired annuitants. So that's, close to like 15 hours a week. And I mean, might I add, I think that's the reason that possibly in the past you've had to use consultants, because the staff, is not full-time. This could be, my job could be a full-time job. I'm sure, Bill's job might be able to be a full-time job also if you want to really do things effectively. And
actually, well, the consultants were hired for various other reasons that had nothing to do with staff not being able to do the job.
Well, it's not about doing the job. It's that staff are stretched thin. And so they, if it's not full-time, you need different help. It's not a comment on being able to do a job well or not, just that sometimes, without a full-time person in place, you do rely on more consultants.
And also, I mean, in order to keep these positions half-time so that they don't have to have benefits, because once positions, reach over a certain number of hours in a week on a consistent basis, the district could possibly become liable to provide benefits. And if they're not, and these people, people are working. So we have to make sure to keep these positions what they are while still completing everything that needs to get done.
I think 75% FTE is the max that CalPERS lets us get away with. Because that's how the district administrator position was. It didn't have benefits, but was operating at near like 75%.
And from what I've read, I believe it's under 30 hours. So it has to be 29 hours a week for it to not, but I'm not positive. So, so basically, we would be adding the accounting specialist at 10 hours a week. And that would be to do things like manual, doing payroll and doing AP. And then I would just be overseeing those things. And any other accounting duties, anything dealing with CalPERS, they could take over. So that's the thought on that position.
So essentially the old financial analysis from the last year's budget still for the most part holds true?
Yes, that's correct. Especially because the general manager is at a lot less hours, 15 hours a week.
Okay.
As opposed to say 25 or 30.
And I'm guessing no one's yet started to run the question of what happens to all those projections and analysis when we start factoring in the public safety building and the moving out and all that, because I know at least moving out could be around near 15K or like within the $10,000 range just for the communications alone. So like, and then how much, depending on how much we spend on the annex, that brings up the question of how far we move towards that minimal amount of reserves we can operate with before we're drawing credit from the county. And I think if the cash analysis, at least for the lower number of staff before all of this, was like in 2012-13, we spent about $950,000 going from the start of the fiscal year to our lowest point.
Come on.
So none of the budget yet has any of that, how that would impact that sustainability.
No, but that's on page 22. We have the capital purchases and projects, and we could add that. Well, we have the government lease that we're going to need to look at for the police cars. We'll have the mid-year budget review to include a discussion of capital improvements for the annex and the temporary housing space for the police department. So I think the idea is to come back at some point throughout the year and review these important issues once we have more clarity on what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think you'll have to come up with, and the staff is going to have to present kind of a full project budget that includes all the things that you're talking about in terms of relocation, temporary facilities, what the permanent facilities will be, and how that's going to be financed. There's going to have to be a pretty significant, call it mid-year review, but sort of post-adoption review of the budget for the. And a lot of those are one-time costs, but they'll still need to figure out the sources and uses for all of them.
I guess because I bring it up is because that may change how we do our spending habits in the first half of the year. Because if you are spending assuming you don't have those problems, but then suddenly you run into all these recalculations, suddenly what would look like a good budget to begin with suddenly is unsustainable because we might have started to hit rafts we weren't expecting. And that's, I bring up that concern because we've been operating, actually the district's been operating sort of with an artificially high reserve for the last few years because of building up towards the community center. And now this talk that we're winding down more towards the 2012-13 levels and possibly going lower than that presents all sorts of concerning questions given the spending habits so far.
Are you, this has a projected unassigned cash balance of 1.7. Is that the money that we would consider our quote unquote reserve, Bill?
That is the reserve.
Or Catherine, sorry. Uh-huh. And we have a policy in place to keep 800,000 as a reserve?
And well, the thing is 800,000 in some cases might not be enough. That's when you look back at some of those years, you see fluctuations of spending that from start to lowest point were more than 800,000.
Well, I do think that we're all cognizant of the fact that we have these potential large expenses, and that's why I believe you know, we are trying to put together a conservative budget. For example, the notion of, you know, if we have to do certain things in the park around trees, I think we would start out by looking at what must be done. And that's why the amount of 26 versus 40 is in there. And I've already said, I think that that's an area where we have to be cautious because of other expenses.
Yeah, I'm just like, I don't know, because I'm financially planning, you always financially plan for the worst case, and we are literally about to walk into the worst case of we've finished one capital project and are going to begin into another that may have all sorts of interesting effects on spending. And this sort of speaks to the fact that we're talking about this now, talking about the, excuse me, instead of having started talking 3 or even 4 or 5 months ago, to be honest.
I would respectfully disagree that we've been talking about this for maybe even a year. And so again, until there is a solid plan in place, we could cogitate all we want, but we don't have what we need to make, you know, decisions based on a plan or numbers or actually what's going to happen. So I think we're proceeding appropriately and cautiously best we can with the information we have at the moment.
We've lost Cyrus. He was kind of, his audio was threatening to cut out. Let's see if he can come back quickly.
I do have a question. Where would I find a copy of the reserve policy? I've been looking for it. Does it?
Director Deputy myself can send you.
We're trying to find it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're back, Cyrus. Wait a second. There you go.
Said everything or didn't, like half of what I said disappeared.
You dropped.
Anything else?
Should we go back to solid, are we going to go back to solid waste?
Yeah, sure. Let's go back to solid waste, Catherine.
Okay. So we do not have a budget for solid waste, and I don't know that we have you ever had a budget for solid waste in the past?
I can't answer that.
Okay.
We've had the amounts broken out in terms of franchise fees and the amount that we then turned and paid to the county for hazardous.
Yeah, so for income.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Income purposes, yeah.
But Catherine, you will probably in the future need to start some kind of a balance for solid waste for consultants and attorney fees for negotiating when the contract, before the contract is up in 2023.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Eileen. You added that somewhere already.
We put it in consultants. I think it's $30,000 we have in consultants.
Well, yeah, if you think that's enough for all the consultants, I think that's.
I don't know, Bill, can you weigh in on that?
I don't know the answer to that. It's more or less a placeholder, but I don't know how much the rate review would be for this size contract.
Well, we can use the franchise fees for rate review. So as long as those are not put into the general fund, we can show them out as in terms of. Oh, there it is on 448 A, excuse me.
Where are we right now?
You have it in the general fund. So
yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So we can, I mean, that could maybe be moved to just a solid
separate. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do any other expenses occur? And other expenses don't occur regularly. It's just the one time when you have contract negotiations.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so for the renewal in 2023, what is the goal for when you want to start to deal with that?
We'll have to be looking at that this coming year. look at considering whether we want to do that in addition to adding composting services. Is something we've been looking at for a while.
Yeah. So would you start in September, or?
What do you mean?
It'd be a good idea.
Start what?
Start reviewing the solid waste contract in September.
No, that hasn't been adopted by the board yet. But
okay.
The whole issue of solid waste still needs to be determined.
So what's left, Catherine?
Okay, so if we just go to page 23, we kind of glossed over this, but I'm just going to go over into a little bit more detail. So the total cash carry forward from last year is 3.542,126, and that is the audited number from that's the final audited number from our audit. Our projected net surplus this year is 11,000, so that puts us at a total projected cash balance of $3,500,000. And this non-spendable portion of the district bond, that's what we will get back. So that's why it's a negative number. And this number is from a calculation done by our bond administrator, MBS. The estimated vacation and comp time liability, that is pretty accurate. I got that from our payroll system. The restricted Bayview net balance that could change by a few $1,000s, but not much. There might be one adjustment that has to be made to that. The community center funds that we've already spent this year are the 1.561,991, and that will match page 24. And it's number 2. It's footnoted, or it's noted number 2 on page 24 if you want to reference that. The community center renovation funds that were expected to complete the project this year is 168. And the reason that I put that in, I know this is our projected cash balance at the end of this year. It just gives us a little bit more, detail on the project. And these are real numbers from the community center, so I wanted to include them. And the community center grant will be added in once we receive that, but that's probably going to take 3 to 4 months once we put the final paperwork in for it. So the projected unassigned cash balance is about $1,724,900. I'm sorry, it's getting late. $1,724,900.
24,000.
I don't know why I can't do place value right now. Thank you. Okay, and then I broke out the restricted funds for the community center, and I broke those out up above so you could see the general fund versus the restricted community center funds. And then page 24 is a community center renovation budget status report. This will have to get finalized once this is actually, complete, but I think that this is pretty much done. I don't know that there are any other expenses that I have heard of that are going to happen. So I think that I don't imagine that these numbers are going to change very much. The only difference is that we have not actually paid out. It's total that will be used to close out the project at $168,000. The only question that I had for the board about all of this is there were total project allocations taken from a spreadsheet that I had from Bill Zanoni. There was like initial project allocation, 2016-17 appropriation, 17-18 appropriation, 18-19, and 19-20. And those total reserve allocations were $1,090,000. So I don't know what the history of that was. If that money was supposed, was restricted, I believe that that's restricted money for the community center. So I showed that here. But I don't know what the history of those appropriations were, if there were resolutions for those.
Yeah, I believe there are. Rachel
Okay.
could probably speak better to that, but those were specific allocations either through finance committee.
They weren't resolutions ever, Catherine. They were allotted. The initial one was the 300,000. That was done before 2000, before I took the project over. But I think, right, some of that money, if was spent. So it was 241,000 ultimately that was left over by the time that I took over when I took over the project, which was a total kind of restart.
Yeah, okay. And I think I took care of those initial contract costs at the top there, because those were, I'm just talking about what was actually allocated versus.
Yeah, nothing was ever, we never did. I think we finally made a resolution, right, to move it over into a capital account, but otherwise we just told every, we just
set aside.
Yeah, instructed Debbie Russell to move those amounts over.
And just so that everybody knows, and this is on public record, it was always in the general fund. There's never been a separate account since I've started at the district. So it's always been.
Never moved over into a capital account?
No, it's always been in the general fund, correct. So this is the accounting for it, but it was never in its own fund at the county.
At some point we asked for it to be in a capital account.
Yeah, we asked several years in a row, just like we asked for vehicle replacement funds to be done in a capital account year after year after year. There should have been, we kept trying to put vehicle replacement money that we had. Okay, c'est la vie.
Okay, so, and I'm not going to review pages 26 through 22 through 30 in great detail. These are just, this is just the detail of the total budget. And the highlighted columns are all of the new accounts that will be added to the chart of accounts. And that's what I will do once this budget is adopted.
I'm not sure I've ever done this before. I'm going to clap for this budget. I love the detail and the breaking out into much, the granularity is really great. So
that actually used to be in the documents that were provided, the full longhand budgets. All that detail was there. And actually a lot of these accounts don't actually explain how they're coming to some of their conclusions, like $80,000. Yeah, I mean, you can go back and look at the old budgets. It was all there. We did this last year where I had to ask for that, and we saw that internal granularity that wasn't presented to the public, but was given to the finance committee.
Well, thank you, Catherine. I think that's the point we're trying to make. Thank you very much. So I think we should let the public weigh in on this before we start making any decisions. So, and just to be clear, this is a public comment period. You can speak once for up to 3 minutes. So let's go. Carl, you're
there's one other quick thought I think people should know. Like, this budget only cleared finance committee, but still had 1 no vote against it. I think that's the first year in a row we've ever had a budget with a no vote, in as far as I can go back and remember.
All right, thank you. Carl?
Yes, thank you very much. Because of the hour, I'll try to be as short as I can. I zoomed in early, and I heard our general manager compliment Kathleen on the budget documents. You will notice that the documents in the board package are excellent, but they have nothing to do with the material that the finance committee received. The finance committee had to operate on a cash flow budget that was dated January 31st. The finance committee had to operate on a balance sheet that was almost 6 months old. I had our police is $2.2 million direct and indirect expense out of a budget of $3.5 million. And I did not have salary sheets. There was no narrative in this. I was surprised. It was not management's finest hours, I can tell you that. I expected our new general manager to give some kind of a vision statement for the year, but I didn't hear anything. So when we finished the finance committee, I missed the thing that Vilas was talking about, but somehow we don't know what to do with it. But today's document is not what the finance committee received. And it sort of shows me what management thinks of the finance committee. I only have 2 line items I want to comment on. I want to call your attention to 401. 401 is listed for the coming year as a 3.5% increase. But if you look at expected receipts, you're actually at a 4.5%. Now, our revenues over a long period of time have been very consistent. And we may do the 4.5, but I don't think that we will. I raised the issue of legal fees at Finance Committee, and our president told me to bring that to the board. Now, we have line item 595 at 25,000 and line item 530 at 85,000. Those of you who've been around for a long time know that I've been spending the last 10, 12 years talking about legal fees. I don't think in the last 10 years we have managed to have legal fees but below $200,000. We've been as high as 400,000. And here we have a total budget of 110. And I don't think it's realistic unless this board and this management team is willing to be very disciplined. Our legal fees are going to be at $250,000 again. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. And all right, DELK, you're next. Go ahead, DELK.
Hey, Stephen Still. Am I here?
You're there.
All right. I want to thank the new financial system for actually splitting up the revenue, levy revenue tax, rather than it goes all into the police fund, that it goes to the other 3 interests of the district. All right. Number 1, we are a police protection district. Thank you, Cyrus. But also, the district provides for a long time, beginning in 1955, park and recreation services, which has to be funded somehow. In addition to that, it later chose to take on solid waste and then eventually recycling. And probably not many of you know that in, I believe it was 1997, the longtime service provider, Bayview Refuge, went to the county and got them to take over the franchise. And this district sued the county to get it back. Why would that be? Why did this district want to have part of its service to be providing refuge and recycling services. I believe that Kensington KPPCSD has made a profit on this, with the exception of from about I believe it was 2009 to 2013. When
Dale,
they,
you're coming up into the 3-minute mark. Could you summarize?
all right. I think you should look at all 3 services that this district provides.
All right, thank you. Linda? Trying to unmute you. There you go.
Hi there, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, this is unusual for me not to be yelling across the room, but I'm assuming you can hear me.
We can hear you.
All right, first thing, thanks to Chief Schuld. Welcome, and thank you for your comments regarding the performance of the officers. It's refreshing, and you take over from Interim Chief Simpkins, and we've been delighted to have both of you. In particular, I appreciated your conversation regarding ancillary personnel, and I agree with you, having served on the board in the past, that it would be not appropriate in this particular district to have people who are basically social worker types handling things because we don't have something for them to do otherwise, and it is a utilization of some of the more lax time for our regular officers. So thank you for those comments. And another thing I'd like to, there was a conversation from one of the directors regarding whether we had sensitivities regarding African Americans and other minority personnel. I do want to say that I personally know a couple of our residents who are African American who have in particular stated to me while I was and while I was not a board member, how grateful they are to the Kensington Force, both for its diversity and for its handling with sensitivity and respect for the minority members of this community. So thank you again. Now to the budget. I think there's been kind of a sliding over of 2 issues. One is the reserves. These should be clearly delineated, and it should be well reserved because we are facing a major transition with that public safety building. The second is there should be some budgetary projections at this point of what it will take to house the force, and in particular, I'm looking at the annex for that reason, and some allocation of monies that should go to making that annex building fit, perhaps for handling at least interim administration, if not permanent administration, if we can't get administration fit into the new public safety building as it's configured. And let's see, what have I got here? So interim housing of the police. Oh, and the transition course. And thank you very much for your service, all of you. And those are my comments.
Thank you, Linda. Wait a second. Trying to get the next person, just wait. All right. Paul or Vita, I'm not sure. Wait a second.
It's Paul, Chris. Thank you very much for
recognizing
me. Yeah, and second what Linda said, thank you all for a very productive and informative meeting tonight. Really what we like to see from our elected officials and public servants. I have a specific question. I think Cyrus touched on it earlier, but I heard during Ms. Korsak's presentation of the budget, if I didn't miss here, that there is a line item for payments on the pension obligation bonds. If I heard that correctly, I think Cyrus identified a potential problem. Namely, I listened to the meeting at which that was discussed, and I don't think there was a clear vote to authorize the pension obligation bonds. The way I heard it, there was a vote on a motion to have a vote, but there was never a vote on the obligation bonds themselves. The problem is that as I heard the discussion prior to that, I think a majority of directors spoke against the public obligation bonds. So it's hard to imagine how they could have turned around and voted in favor of issuing the bonds. So the reason I raised this, and let me hasten to add, I personally favored the idea. But I think before you get down to the point where people hand over $4 million to you, you're going to have a law firm sign an opinion that says these were duly authorized by all necessary governmental action. And I don't think you have a clear record on that if you go back and look at the recording of that prior meeting. So if you propose to go forward with the pension obligation bonds, I would suggest you think about a do-over. And if I'm mistaken, I apologize for taking your time. And again, thank you very much for putting in these long hours on taking care of our community's business.
Thank you. I'm going to take Dave, and then we'll have to extend the meeting again. And don't worry, I see you, Jim. Go ahead, Dave. Dave.
Thanks, Chris. And let me echo the comments that Linda and Paul have made. It's been a very well-run meeting, and the discussions have been excellent. Appreciate everybody's effort in putting this budget together, Catherine in particular. Two questions. One of the chief, it has to do with reserve officers. Do we employ reserve officers? And if not, is one of your goals to obtain some reserve officers for the force?
We do want reserve officers. We have one in background, but it's been delayed because it's going through Alameda County background, but we do have one reserve in background.
And then a question of Catherine, going to page 23 on what is called the projected unassigned cash balance is, and you're saying that's the reserve, but doesn't that include the community center restricted 807,000 and change?
So we've used pretty much all of that. That's to show, so that the 807,000 or 807,272 is what was restricted at the beginning of last year, right? So that actually need to be changed. It should be 2019. I think when I carried the cells down, it automatically. So that's at the end of last year, the balance would be 3.542126 is the total. So basically we've paid out, but this takes into account us paying out 1.7 million for the net cash balance to be 1.7 million. Right. But that includes getting the, the grant, which we won't receive for 3 to probably 4 months.
Right, but your total projected cash balance going in includes that 807,000, which starts out at 3.553 million. And then you have the two lessers and the one addition, which takes you to 1.724. But that still includes the 807,000.
That doesn't. That 800, I just brought that down at the bottom to show what the 800,000 up at the top included. That 1.7 is less the 1730308 for the
right.
For the total. So I'd be happy to email you this spreadsheet. It might make more sense
I think you just need to understand, Dave, that the second line under projected 2019-2020, 807,272, she just then broke it out below to show you what that was.
Okay, so, all right. Well, it'd be nice to see the spreadsheet then.
Yeah,
So,
I don't mind sending it.
yeah, so what we have is an unrestricted balance of 1.7 million.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And thank you again.
Although but 800 would be restricted in a sense because it would be considered, needed to be kept in reserve.
It was restricted, but then it was used for the community center purposes.
No, but I'm saying that based on the reserve policy, which you'll get from Rachel or Chris, of the 1.724, we should keep that, 800 of that is not to be touched.
Oh, correct. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's my
question.
question.
A different 800 now.
That's a different 800. That's an 800.
Yeah.
That's part of the reserve policy, nothing to do with the community center.
Yes.
Right, but so is the 807 part of the 1.724?
No.
Okay. That's a confusing part. All right, well, thank you again.
Thanks, Dave.
Need a vote to extend the meeting?
Yeah, we need to. Well, Jim, I see you. Your hand keeps coming in and out, but let's get this meeting extended. Wait a second. We've got to get.
I have no idea.
I'll make a motion that we extend the meeting until 11:15.
I'll second the motion.
All right. Sylvia?
Aye.
Cyrus?
Aye.
Michelle?
Yes.
And Eileen?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So that's 5-0 to go to 11:15. All right. And Jim, you had your hand up and down and up and down. I don't want to not call on you if you want to say something. But Jim is, okay. Well, then that's the public comment is closed. So what are we going to do with this budget then?
Well, I think we're going to look at it again the first meeting in July. Wasn't that the intention?
Jim raised his hand. Let's see if he was just having technical issues, operator error. Here we go. Trying to get Jim unmuted. There you go, Jim.
You hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yes, I have some problems, but I think we're going to have a meeting with the finance committee, and Dave and Linda both raised some very important points as far as I'm concerned. I think that the page 23, which shows how much money we have in our unrestricted reserve account, is wrong. And we clearly have 3 minutes to talk about this. I don't have the time to do it, but I'll be happy to talk about it in the next day or so with staff. We need to make sure that we know how much unrestricted reserves we have, because those unrestricted reserves are going to have to, some of those are going to have to be used for the new relocation. And that comes to a point that Linda raised, which is I think that we need to be putting into our budget now more money to handle those reserves. We shouldn't be talking about it in 6 months. So I'm hoping that at our finance meeting, we can talk about these things. And now I'd like to talk about a technical thing that I think you need to be aware of. And that is that per your policy number 3020, you were supposed to have had a budget in May, and then it was to have been brought to the board for final approval, second reading, in June. Obviously, you're not going to be able to do those two steps. And so what it says under policy number 3020.4 is that any extension of this date must be approved by board action. So you need to take a board action tonight to extend the approval of this budget, because you're going to have to go through 2 more approvals, and you're going to have to move into July to do that. So you just need to make sure that you do that tonight.
Is that everything?
That's it.
Well, I believe that the last meeting we already discussed this schedule. If I'm incorrect, correct me, but I believe we discussed at the last meeting that this budget would be not final this meeting, but at the next meeting in July. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes.
By consensus.
But I'm happy to make a motion that we return this budget for final approval at the July 9th, 2020 meeting of the KPPCSD.
I will
Isn't this a discussion item where no action can be taken? I'm just asking as a parliamentarian, not trying to get in the way, just asking.
I wouldn't really know the answer to that question. If we're discussing the budget, let me see the agenda really quick here. Sorry. Well, it doesn't say a resolution, but it does say discussion. So I don't know. Let me get Ann unmuted.
How do I unmute? Okay, am I unmuted?
Yep.
Yes. Try again.
I think I've gotten it. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. There's an interesting point about whether or not this would be in violation of the Brown Act, but I don't think it's a necessary point to address, because I think, although Jim is correct that the intention is usually to get final action on a budget by the end of June, in fact, I think that portion of the policies was repealed last year. And we have yet to adopt a new policy chapter addressing financial matters. That's, I believe, on the list of things to do on the admin side. But I don't think that policy is still in force. I can look really quickly if you want to repeat to me again the section where Jim found it.
Section 3020.
3020. Okay.
And 3020.4.
Well, that was a separate section.
Section 2 real quickly. Huh.
Perhaps while Ann's looking, I can at least tell you what the intent was. I mean, the intent was to have the board have an opportunity to review the budget and suggest any changes that you might have that should be incorporated into the final. That's why it's a direction to staff recommendation. And then the direction would be taken back. It would be incorporated into a final budget for adoption at your next meeting. That was the intent.
And that's what we discussed at our last meeting.
Yes. All right, so
so I actually do, I do believe that it is still in force. It was simply renumbered. But I think in this circumstance, we would have to settle for substantial compliance, because obviously no board action was taken in time. And the board is free to adjust its own guidelines, or at least go for substantial compliance with its own guidelines. So it did take an action, although it wasn't a formal action last time. Certainly everyone's intent was clear that the board was going to adopt the budget in July anyway. So I would be comfortable if the board proceeded as intended.
All right. So I guess the question is, staff, do you have enough information to proceed? To produce a final budget document?
I'm sort of looking at Catherine to see how she would answer. I think we do, unless you wanted to have any changes you wanted to direct this evening that we would incorporate into the final.
If you want to, you know, we haven't set aside any, or we haven't done anything about the relocation. So if that's going to be done now, then that needs to get incorporated into this budget versus. Well,
I think as Bill has mentioned, we don't know what that even entails. Is it temporary location? Correct. Maybe it's a permanent location.
Yeah, on that, we still recommend coming back with an overall project budget with schedule.
I mean, I'm comfortable Oh, sorry.
No, you can go first.
Well, I'm comfortable leaving without the temporary removal because what we have currently in the budget is $40,000 for rental of the community center. So there are funds that as soon as we move, administration is currently working from home. As soon as we
you mean rental of the public safety building?
I'm sorry, rental, what did I say? Community center?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Let's pay ourselves to rent, no, I'm sorry. That there's 40,000 there allotted for public safety building space rental. So that will go away if we vacate.
I mean, but I guess the point is this, if we move to a new building, would it need to be essential services standard to begin with to have a police department there? We can't just move them into somewhere that isn't seismically safe. That's the other, big elephant in moving is, does it have to be essential services standard? And so then that is in itself in the whole nother bandwagon of costs. And that's, I'm assuming the 50,000 that Kevin Hart had put in had some bearing on like maybe some sort of specialized trailers or something would work. I'm not sure where he was getting that number, but if you're talking about a physical building like the annex, there's all the repairs and all the seismic upgrading that might be needed. So, that's another question. Is it going to be a physical building or some sort of specialized bolted trailer, and where, if not where, and then the fiber optics, do we need to trench or not, all of that. And so those could end up being more than just 40,000. As I said, from what little I've already heard, is the fiber optics itself is, going over 10,000 if we had somewhere already with the lines.
From our discussion with Steve Lake, through Chief Simpkins, it doesn't have to be an essential services building for temporary housing, is my understanding. And in terms of fiber optics, and I mean, that's to be determined. So you're absolutely right. It wouldn't necessarily be 40,000, but at this juncture, we don't have more accurate numbers. And I think if we get them in the next 2 weeks, fantastic. I mean, I will immediately suggest that we put them in the budget. But otherwise, I think we're looking at a lot of review in the fall to make sure that this accurately reflects.
I should also point out one other item about the 40,000. The public safety building lease technically doesn't go away. Say if we can stay there, then that lease is probably going to be converted either to some sort of payment schedule, or we're going to have to think about how we pay our share of the building, because they may be expecting something from us too, that they're not going to maybe give it for free. Those are questions. So it just doesn't, that 40,000 is probably going to exist in some shape or form. It's probably going to be more than 40,000.
Right, but that 40,000 provides already a placeholder for some funds to go toward this project.
And I'm saying it's a gross underestimate if we're thinking worst case scenario.
It's not an estimate. Okay, we don't have an estimate, and that's the problem. We don't have certainty over just about any aspect of this. And so I think just like the staff wants to come to us with a plan where they know whether the elevator is in and out, whether they know whether we are going to be part of this building or not, all those things have a big bearing. And the same thing with going forward. We really need to know what we're talking about, and we'll be shooting in the dark. And I mean, I think if this is an accurate budget, and it is a conservative budget, and I don't know why there's a question on the 1.7 in reserves, even if that 8 is, if you have 1.7, then you have 8 set aside to keep, that leaves you with the difference potentially to access.
I mean, like all these conversations we should have been having months ago. Like that's what the fire board was doing.
We have been having them, and we've been going forward in a very deliberate, cautious way, because the situation changes from week to week and month to month. 3 or 4 months ago, there was no way we were going to be part of the public safety building, and in the last 2 months, it's like maybe more likely, and so we don't know. And
but we never even were planning for if we were not going to be part of it. Like those are big things we should have been projecting.
I don't believe that's accurate. I think there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of planning, a presentation in January we're doing the best we can step by step.
President Debbie, may I respectfully suggest that we move on to item 7 before 11:15?
Yeah, I just want to make sure. So staff, you have enough to produce a final in 2 weeks. That's correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
I think we do. And then on item 7, if you want to carry that over and adopt that with the final budget, that would be okay as well. Because that's the appropriations limit, and it doesn't need to go in. It becomes part of the budget that you adopt.
Oh, I would say we just wait if everyone's okay with that.
That's fine if you don't care.
All right. Unless anybody has any objections, we'll just roll 7 over. Just don't even talk about that.
Do we need a table or?
No, we don't. Well, if we don't bring it up, we don't have to do it. It was just. I'm assuming Ann. See if I can get Ann in here. We just don't talk about it.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. You can simply continue it to the next meeting. Tabling would be a more long-term putting off. I would just continue the matter.
All right, so we'll continue that. All right, I think unless I'm missing something. Thank you, everybody. Thank the attendees for sticking with us, and that's the end of the meeting. See you in a couple of weeks, I guess.
Bye.
Bye.
4th.
Thank you, Chief Scholl, Catherine,
Yes.
Bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Linnell, appreciate your time.